Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 52, I spoke with Dave Burns via phone at his home in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Dave is affectionately known to military aviators across the United States as Flag Dave. And in April 2005, Dave began welcoming military aircrew visiting the Fort Smith Regional Airport with the American flag. Over the last 2 decades, Dave has distributed an incredible 85,000 personalized miniature American flags to members of the military, each bearing a custom message of thanks and gratitude. Dave has been recognized by a wide variety of military organizations, and he is one of only a small handful of civilian members of the prestigious Army Association Hall of Fame Order of St. Michael. Dave is a living legend, a genuine patriot, and a true friend, and I'm humbled to be able to share his story here. Thanks, as always, for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 52, with Dave Burns. Enjoy. Okay, Dave, anytime I've sat down with someone, kind of the rule for the podcast, and I guess it is my rule so I can break it if I want, is it's going to be someone who's a prior military aviator or a current military aviator. A couple exceptions to that, but tonight is definitely an exception because you are an exceptional human being. So we'll kind of start the episode the way we always do, but we're going to kind of take it in a different direction. So first off, Dave, welcome, and where were you born?
Thank you very much. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, was only there for 2 years, my first 2 years of life, so went out of the big city and came back to Arkansas. My parents had actually moved from Arkansas in the 50s to go up to Chicago to get jobs. There wasn't a lot of jobs in Arkansas at the time, and once they saved up money, we moved back to Arkansas. So I don't really know much about Chicago. That's where I was from, but I've lived really my whole life here in Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Well, Fort Smith is the reason you and I know one another, and through military aviation specifically. What was that first touch point or that first memory of military aviation for you?
I would have to say books that I read in elementary school about fighter pilots in the military, and also air shows that my father would take me to that really, of course, got you up close to the military aircraft. You could touch them and talk to the pilots, and of course that fired my imagination. So those two things are probably the biggest things that got me at a young age really interested in the military.
Perfect. Well, we talked about Fort Smith, we talked about aviation and military aviation, so let's get right into the story. Some of the folks that are military aviators might know who you are already, but for those that don't, tell me about the airport, tell me about Fort Smith, and tell me how you first started going out and interacting with military aviators as they passed through the town.
It really should have never gotten started, but it did. I thank the Lord that He opened this door that allowed me to do this. It really started back when our son was 8 years old. And we'd always taught him since he was 3 years old about the military and how much to appreciate the military and what they did. And of course, 3 years old, he didn't understand it a lot, but as he grew and got a little bit older, he understood. So a C-5 Galaxy came into our airport. Fort Smith is not a great big town. It doesn't have a huge airport, but we could handle a C-5. But it landed, and I wanted him to see this airplane. And so I told him, I went and got him out of school and brought him out. We were on the west end outside the fence watching this C-5. And then when it took off, it was quite amazing. And after it took off, an EA-6B Prowler came in behind it. And he looks up at me at 8 years old and says, "Dad, there's a military plane right there." And I said, "It is, son." He said, "Well, why can't we go thank them for their service?" Because that's what he'd been taught since he was 3 years old. And I just told him, I said, "Well, son, there's a big issue here." I said, "See this big fence?" I said, "We're on this side and they're on that side." So anyways, I took him down closer to the FBO, which we did not know at the time what an FBO was. But I knew of a place that I could get him to where he could see the pilots walk in and get a little closer. We go down, watch them walk in. They're doing, at the time, we didn't understand it, but it was a quick turn. They stayed in their flight gear. And they walked into the FBO, and we were just outside the door. And he asked me, "Dad, can we not go in there and thank them?" And I said, "Well, we're not even supposed to be here, most likely. And there's a good possibility that if we stay here very long, the police are going to come out and, there's people hanging on our fence." But he asked me 3 times. The third time, I thought, well, okay, I guess they can just tell us we need to leave. So we walk through the door, and the 4 pilots are there in the lobby. And we get to meet them, and we thank them for everything that they do and their families. And we take some pictures with them. And from there, the FBO didn't tell us, "Who are you?" And we left. after, the pilots left. And that next Saturday, instead of watching cartoons with him on Saturday morning, I asked him, hey, you want to go out to the airport? So we did. And then that's where the story really gets going. But we basically just started showing up at the FBO and got to know the great folks there at the FBO, and they were so good to us and allowed it to grow into what it has gotten to today.
Okay, Dave, a couple things from that story that jump out to me. Number one, I used to work at a little airport. I have great memories of my hometown in Tullahoma. Good on those folks right at that FBO, because just as easily as, they made the choice to be nice to y'all and you had a good memory and a good, obviously it's going to get bigger from here, but good on them for treating you nice. And I've often said, fences only keep the honest people out. And that's honestly part of the reason I have the podcast is some of these stories, some of these experiences, I get the feeling a lot of folks are sitting outside the airport and they never take the step that you did, going into the FBO, trying to meet somebody, starting that conversation. Good on you for doing it, and good on them for being supportive of it. So I think that's really, really cool.
It was really amazing because we had no idea really what we were doing, and they embraced us and they saw what we were trying to do. And the manager at the time, he actually kind of took us under his wing and gave us instructions, because something that, I didn't consider is when you go out on that flight line, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars of aircraft, and there's safety concerns. And so they really worked with us to help us understand what to do, what not to do, where to be and where not to be. Because unless a pilot asked us to go out, we couldn't go out on the flight line, because I did not have a flight line card. So the responsibility would be on the military pilot or pilots that asked us to go out, and that was okay. And that's what was interesting about it, is that as time went on, the manager of the FBO told me one day, he said, Dave, he said, what we need to do is we need to put you through a class and get you a flight line card so that you can go out. This was a couple of years, but the trust factor was built to the point that they trusted us enough, knowing that we would follow the rules and know what to do. And it was amazing. And that's where it really got started from there. And, why I got the nickname from the military, because I asked the FBO if it was okay if I took a full-size American flag out, and they basically let me job shadow the line personnel, and I would get behind them as the jets and military aircraft would come in and park them with the flag. It's really grown over the years where the FAA even comes out to look at the airport from time to time. And they don't know me personally, but they know who I am, and they just kind of drive by and wave. They don't even come over and ask me for, who are you, what are you doing? So that's kind of neat to know that I've got the trust of the airport and so many of the other folks there that allow me to do this incredible thing that I'm allowed to do to show our military the appreciation that they deserve.
I'm glad you mentioned trust. I think trust is key. The FBO at the time when you started was TAC Air. I think it's Signature now. Kind of same for me in East Tennessee. I'm originally from Knoxville. The FBO there, TAC Air as well, is Signature now. Some of my earliest memories of aviation photography, gosh, it was a early model Growler. It was a Neptune. It was doing firefighting in the Smokies. I think there might have been one other, like a T-45 or something else out on the ramp. But I remember as a little kid, and I want to say, 2005, 2006, just walking into the FBO. I'm a kid with a camera. My dad had taken my brother and I there. And they just said, yeah, go out, take some pictures. And there was no escort. They just let me walk out, and they trusted me, right? That trust was so key, but I also didn't do anything crazy. And then now we think to 2024 and a lot of the rules and restrictions and cameras and all the stuff at airports, that would never happen. But that was kind of where some of my early love for military aviation came from. Get to start meeting folks kind of similar to you, but my Rolodex is tiny compared to yours and some of the folks you've met. So I want to get into that. You mentioned the flag. You mentioned bringing that out. What are some of your memories of the folks, and how did they respond as you welcome them to Fort Smith?
Well, that's another great question. There's so many stories there. I'll try to pick one that's really interesting. This was probably 5 years ago or so. We had a C-17 that came in at 11 o'clock at night. And I was, of course, with the line personnel to park the jet. I had a big light that I make sure on my night, what I call night ops, I guess, at the airport, that shines up on the American flag. We had to park him way out, so we had to go way away from the FBO and go way down the flight line. Well, what happened was the little wands, the little light wands that the line guy was using, they went dark. So I had my light on the American flag, and so basically I just stayed behind the line person and was waving the flag with the light on it. They came right up and parked where we were at, and then after the crew shut down and buttoned up for the night and came inside the FBO, they came over to me and said, hey, thanks for the flag. That was awesome. We loved seeing it in the dark. I said, we didn't see anywhere else. We thought that's where we're supposed to park. It worked out good for everybody that had the light for the flag so that they could see it, because the little light one that my friend was using to park him had gone out. They weren't working. So The response most of the time that I get from the flag is a lot of the times they'll pop out of their fighters or out of their transports and with a big smile and say, thank you so much. And of course, that gives me the opportunity to say, hey, this is you. You're the flag, so thank you. That one was one that always sticks out to me.
Well, Dave, I feel a little bit remiss here. One of the things we haven't done is really unpacked why Fort Smith is so important. So for those that aren't aware, kind of middle of the United States, the reason why I think Fort Smith is so key to military aviation, think of yourself in an F-18, F-16, what are you, a fighter of your choice, right? You're trying to cross the country. For whatever reason, the math seems to work that it's a good, maybe middle of the way stop or second or third fuel stop going east to west or west to east. So Fort Smith, massive runway. Obviously, as you can tell, probably friendly folks, big ramp. There is an Air National Guard presence on the airfield, and we're hopefully going to talk about that later. So there's a little bit of that support there if it's needed. And then also Fort Smith has developed a reputation over the years, and I knew this before I was even in the military, right? And we met before I was even a naval aviator. But like I said, friendly people, and when you pass through, it's like I think like $1 for a barbecue meal. So it's also it's good food and it's easy on the pocketbook. So kind of that's the background of the airport, but that's the reason why the airfield gets so much traffic and so many military aircraft in specific. Anything maybe I'm missing there?
No, when the aircraft come in and get fueled, I think there's a requirement of like they've got to take 100 pounds of fuel to get the barbecue meal. But there's times that we make sure, which I say we because I don't work for the FBO, but they allow me to do things that would to help them out that wouldn't hurt them insurance wise or anything. I can do small things, but it absolutely. There's a barbecue meal with all the fixings. That's really good because that's the FBO's way of giving back something to those military members that are working so hard, and for them to come in and get a good meal for just a little of nothing is absolutely great. And it always goes over really big. As a matter of fact, most of the air crews that do come in often, they will call on the radio 15 or 20 minutes out and request the sandwiches, and they can have them ready and delivered before they ever get in. So that's a big hit, and rightly so, because all of those in the military, all of you in the military, deserve anything and everything that we as civilians can do to help you out and to show you appreciation.
That's awesome. Well, it truly is appreciated. As you were saying that, the term that came to mind is a quick turn. And so again, if you're trying to cross the United States in a fighter, a helicopter, a tanker, whatever it might be, right? And you need to land, get fuel, get food if you can. If you can't, sometimes you're eating out of the vending machine, right? But getting back up in the bird and continuing on. So I know sometimes those have been the interactions where you just kind of get to, like you said, flag them in, say thanks, and then they're out of there. Other times it's a little bit more, and we'll get into that. But again, the quick turn aspect of it, I think for folks that aren't familiar, that's why Fort Smith is so special. There's not hot gas necessarily. So on the military side, we might stay running in a helicopter with the rotor head still turning, in a jet with the engine still running. You're still going to have to shut down at Fort Smith. I don't think they've got that nailed just quite yet. But basically everything else is already squared away. So everything from NASA astronauts and T-38s to Navy jets to, good Lord, anything and everything. We're going to get into the stories here in a second. But we talked about the flag earlier, Flag Dave, obviously. But not just that large American flag that you wave folks in with, but you also will give folks a smaller American flag. I have 2 of them, thank you again, that I still treasure. And I don't know if I ever told you this, I fly with an American flag in my helmet bag. So every flight in the 53, every flight in the T-6, that big flag was always with me. But the flags that you gave me, I rolled them up and kind of put them inside the bigger flag. And so those have been flying with me ever since you gave them to me, which was before I joined the military. You give those flags out to, and I know there's a number. I want to hear what the number is because there's a ton of flags over the years, starting since the early 2000s. But could you kind of talk a little bit about that and what that's turned into?
Yeah, I would be honored. You make such a great point with the flags. That's the whole idea. It's a very small, 4x6 little small flag. I write a message on the flag. I made sure before I did that it was okay to do that because I understood that the little flag is just the emblem. It's not the big flag. I would never write on the full-size American flag, but I wanted to write a thank you message on these small flags. But as far as numbers, I can get you kind of close. Over the years, somewhere around probably 75 and 80,000 so far. I like to write them because I want it to be personalized. I want them to know it's special to me to give them to you. And it's interesting, you just said the story, and I'm honored by you and keeping those flags and them being so special to you. I met a U.S. Army soldier, wasn't a pilot, he was infantry, but I had met him years ago and gave him a flag. This was probably now about 4 years ago. An Army CH-47s come in and just full of troops. And I knew they were coming the day before, so I was able to fix up flags so I could give everybody. And I was giving each one of them as they were coming up the flag and thanking them. This one particular Army soldier came up. I was getting ready to give him a flag, and he said, "Thank you very much." But he said, "I've already got one." And they were in full battle gear. They were, totally dressed out. And he began to take all of his equipment off. And he reached in over his heart, and he pulls one of my little flags that I had given him years ago. It was tattered and worn, and you could tell it had just been through the war. And he told me, he said, anytime I'm in uniform, anytime I go out on patrols, anytime I'm in combat, this flag is on my heart. And I mean, I was just, I didn't know what to say. It was just huge, that it meant that much to him. It was a defining moment in my life, just got to say. It was just incredible.
Well, Dave, I can understand why. Just even in hearing your voice, right? Like absolutely, absolutely impactful. And there's been things that mentors or friends over the years have given me. And it's not always about the thing, right? Or the monetary value or whatever it might be, but it's that emblem, that symbol of something that means more. And I mean, God, that is a lot of flags. One of the stories I remember you telling me back in the day, I can seem to recall in my mind's eye the photo of a HUD, a heads-up display of a jet. And I want to say it was over Afghanistan or Iraq. You'll have to correct me. But again, it was one of your flags, right? And so one of these aviators you met at some point later in their career, again, that flag stuck with them. And then they took a photo. We won't mention if NATOPS allows you to do that or not in flight, sole manipulator of the flight controls and all that. But right, like it meant something to them. They got a photo of that flag, I don't want to say in combat. Maybe it was in combat. I don't know. These things have literally traveled the world, and it all started in Fort Smith. How unique is that?
Like I said, it's grown into something that I never dreamed that it would. The flags, being able to give the flags away is huge, to let them know that, and to let you know, all in our military, that you are the flag of freedom to us. I tell the pilots and the crews so many times that you give us freedom, but you give us something else beyond freedom. What you give us, all of you in the military, past, present, and future, what you give us is hope. Because without all of you in our military and your families, because they make so many sacrifices also, but without you, there's no hope to progress as a person very much. And what I mean by that is I've been to third world countries on mission trips and had mothers that would fall at my knees as our mission trip was ending and we were getting ready to come back to America, just clutching my legs and sobbing and saying, please, Mr. Burns, please take my children back to America with you. And of course, they didn't understand that you can't do that. And this happened to me more than once. They said, but you don't understand, Mr. Burns, there's no hope for them here. And of course, I didn't say that back, but I understood what they were saying. And this is what I mean by y'all give us hope, is that as a civilian, if I'll go out and apply myself and work hard, I can achieve any dream that I want. But I cannot achieve that dream without my military that's out there protecting me and out there standing in front of evil and giving me that opportunity to better my life and to do things that I could have never dreamed of. So even beyond the freedom, all of you in the military give us hope for a better life, for a hope of doing things that you never dreamed you could do if you'll apply yourself. So it all goes together. And one thing I'll say with that, to me, my military is not plural. And I get the funniest looks when I talk to my air crews and pilots. And I tell them that. I said, my military is not plural, it's singular. It takes the individual to step up, to make the plural. Without the single person, you, Antonio, also, if you didn't step up, who's going to? It takes that one person to step up and take that challenge on, and then it makes the plural. But without the singular, without the one, the plural does not happen.
Makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. And I know you have a deep appreciation for it. Dave, if I'm being honest, more so than many other civilians that I know in the U.S., and definitely more than I had before I joined the military. It's one thing to see these things, and I hate the analogy, but I guess I'll just use it. Everyone, sees Top Gun or a movie or TV, and they think that is military service. And you're absolutely right. You mentioned families. In many ways, I'm living the dream. I'm doing what I love, and my family is along for the ride. And I try to be very considerate of that, and I love them very much. But even there's some things that I can't shield them from or protect them from, so they serve just as much, or I would even say maybe alongside me, and I'm incredibly appreciative. I know everyone else in the military feels the same way about their family as well, because you can't choose who you're related to, but in many ways, you impact their lives. We know each other through a mutual friend, Nick Thomas, and that's because of Nick's incredible photography. Back in the day, I met Nick, was able to reach out to and talk to him, then he connected me with you, but he has had some incredible experiences right alongside you, getting great photos of all the unique aircraft that passed through Fort Smith. I was hoping maybe you kind of introduce us to Nick and tell us a little bit about him.
He's an incredible individual. His photography skills are insane. He loves to take pictures for the military and send them to them. I'll do the same, but my pictures are not, even in the same league with Nick's. But here's the thing about Nick Thomas. When I approached him many years ago about coming out with me to the airport, he said, okay, and so he comes out, and Nick he loves the military just as much as I do. He's got a business of his own, so he doesn't get to come out as much as he wants to. He does as much as he can and loves it. His heart is totally into the military and what the military does for us, everybody that's in the military. And he does everything he can to give back. Interesting story, when some of his pictures that he was taking, some worldwide military magazines, I saw his stuff somewhere, I guess. But anyways, they found a way to contact him and said, we would love to use some of your pictures in our magazine. And of course, Nick was very humbled, and because he's a very humble individual, he said, well, yeah, I'll be glad to send them to you. And they said, well, we'll pay you for those. And Nick, of course, this is just Nick. He's, I don't need any money. I'll give them to you. And of course, he didn't understand that apparently they have to pay. And so we talked about it, and I said, well, Nick, I know you feel bad about this because you can't give it to them, but just take the money that they send you and put it back in your camera equipment and keep taking these incredible photos that you take. And he's got a worldwide following of people that watch for his photos. But the main thing about Nick is he does love the military so much and appreciates and understands what the military members and their families do for us. We've worked with so many of them over the years, and he's just got a heart of gold. He loves doing anything he can to show them appreciation, if that's through pictures or if that's through getting to visit with them and talk to them, because he's very knowledgeable. Anything that he can do to give back to them, that's Nick. He's just a very special individual.
I could not agree more, and I'm glad you said it. One thing I wanted to kind of double down on, only because this is something that you and I both appreciate. One of the things I appreciate about Nick is, a lot of times in military aviation, you'll hear the term spotter. So maybe a tail spotter or someone that's just, outside the fence, just literally taking photos over the fence of military aircraft. And those are generally thought of as spotters. And the difference is someone like Nick, someone like you, right? You guys have those personal connections, those bonds. A lot of us who are military aviators. Before the military, I was someone that loved taking photos of military airplanes. But yeah, like you said, I'm going to give the photos away or share them. I'm not in it for the money, not in it for the internet points, as they say, clicks online. But the reason why that's so different is, honestly, most military aviators are not really keyed up or trained or know, hey, there's some dude pointing a camera at me. Is it a bad guy or is it someone that loves this, right? And there's a couple people that have been able to bridge that gap. And usually it's just that. It's being genuine. It's just talking to people, having those good interactions. But yeah, I'll be honest, I've interacted with people that have, what's a good story? Asked some incredibly detailed questions about the airplane I'm flying. It's like, why do you want to know that again? And the irony is sometimes they're just like super fan. They just love military aviation maybe as much as I do. And sometimes perhaps it's not. Maybe it's something a little bit more nefarious. But the reason I mention it, Nick has never, ever crossed that line. He cares. I know you care. It's about doing it the right way. And like you said, sharing those photos, because the photos of, military folks flying airplanes, they enjoy it, but the family does too, right? And of course, point a camera at any military guy or girl, and we're probably gonna, enjoy having our picture taken. That's part of the the background that makes someone want to be a military pilot. But the other side of it is you're creating a memory, you're sharing a memory, and then it can be, shared with others. So I think that's something that's really, really valued and really appreciated, and that's why I think Fort Smith is such a great place that people enjoy.
It's interesting that you said what you just said. One of the things that is such a joy to do for Nick and I is we'll always ask first, is it okay to take a picture of your aircraft? And do you mind if when you get ready to leave, if we can get some pictures of you in the cockpit, sitting in the plane, and because I always joke, I said, hey, your kids and grandkids and your family for generations needs to see this. They need to see what you've done. And sometimes they'll laugh and say, no, that's okay. And that's okay if they don't. But what's really cool is occasionally I will get a pilot that will say, hey, would you take the pictures, but can I give you an address to send the pictures to? And I said, absolutely. I said, because I can send them electronically, of course, off of email or something, but I love to make prints and actually send the pictures, 8x10s or posters or whatever size that they like. But the pilot will say, look, if you'll send them to my parents or if you'll send them to my grandparents, I'm not going to say a word. They're just going to show up in the mail. And that has just been an absolute joy because the families get these pictures that they didn't know they were going to have. And it's like you had given them a treasure chest full of gold and silver because the families always contact back. And so to be able to do that and bring joy to the families that, again, like you and I have talked about, that sacrifice so much and give so much for them to see their pilot, their son or their daughter in these pictures is just priceless. That this means so much to be able to give that back to them.
And Dave, again, I kind of want to double tap on something here. You mentioned, all these flags that you've given to military crews over the years. No one's paying you to do this. The FBO is certainly not. They are awesome, and they're allowing you all this access and the ability to get out there. But you're doing this out of the kindness of your heart. Like you said, you realize how valued it is and how important it is, and that's really, really freaking cool. Dave, one thing I know you've told me before, and I think is really kind of unique. Let's just put it this way: the aircraft I used to fly, the 53, occasionally we would break down, once or twice. But sometimes when jets pass through the area, folks may end up not getting that quick turn. They may end up spending the night if the aircraft breaks for some reason or another. I know you got a couple stories about that. I was hoping maybe you could tell some of those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Over the years, you're right. Aircraft come in, and of course, they're prone to have some issues from time to time. I remember one particular night, this was a few years back, that we had an F-18 that broke. I was out with the ground crew, just kind of bringing them waters. It was in the summer, it was hot, and got to be night. I was trying to stay out of the way, but I just kind of hang around. If anything they needed, I could run and get it or whatever it was. And I just remember asking them, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. And by this time, it was like 12:30 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, I don't want to get anybody in trouble because there's nobody around. But I said, is there anything that I can do that can help you along with this, and maybe some menial job that you could be doing something else and I could be doing that? And they just kind of looked at me and said, are you kidding? And I said, well, no. I said, just tell me whatever it is. And they said, well, would you mind pumping the jet on the hydraulics? And I said, well, no. I said, just show me what to do. And basically you stick a pole up in the bottom of the jet. There's a place to put it. And you just basically ratchet it back and forth to build the hydraulic fluid back in. And it takes a while to do that. As a matter of fact, that workout should be bottled. It would really do well on the market. But just being able to get involved and help. I've helped a number of air crews over the years, some Air Force, some Marines, some Navy, just to do little things that I was so thrilled that they allowed me to do, because it allowed them to go off and help another group on the jet or on the aircraft that were working that needed help. And it was easy to do what I was doing. Got kind of tired physically, but that's okay. It didn't hurt me any. So that's an interesting question. I really like that one.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned it. So in the 53, I think what sounds like probably the same in the F-18, there's a hydraulic accumulator. And so for us, I think the Marine 53s, so the CH-53s, they had an adapter where you could hook up, just think like a drill, going to basically recharge that accumulator. But in the 53, the Navy 53, literally, like you said, you insert a little bar and just pump back and forth and back and forth. And for us, that accumulator would fire up our APE, auxiliary power plant, the APU. It's an APU, basically. But when we're in the cockpit, we'd throw a handle forward and fire the APU. You could have a circuit breaker pulled, you could have a switch off. Basically, you could mess it up in the front seat. And that was always kind of the contract between the pilots and the aircrew in the back was like, if we messed it up and it was our fault, we would jump out and actually go back there and pump the accumulator up. And then there were some times where we'd be doing maintenance troubleshooting or whatever, and just the APE would not fire. And again, the only way to do it is human power, back and forth, back and forth. And so we would jump back there and help. Or let me put it this way, hopefully the good pilots would do that. Some pilots would sit up front while the poor aircrew were back there pumping away. But I'm smiling because I definitely know it's appreciated. And the way I've seen it on an F-18, I think you're under the bird. It's usually hot. The concrete down there is warm as well. It's not exactly a friendly environment. So again, the fact that you were like, hey, what can I do to help? That attitude, that spirit is definitely appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that. And you're right. It would be hot on the tarmac. Of course, you had shade, at least you were into the plane, but you would lose about probably 5 or 6 pounds in about an hour, which was fine. It didn't hurt me. And the workout was great. But again, all of you in the military, this is something that we as civilians, and I'm very fortunate to get to see the real inner workings of the pilots and the air crews in certain situations and what they do. It's amazing because, so many of us as civilians think, well, hey, they just get up in the aircraft and they sit down, they get strapped in, and they push a button. It starts up and it just doesn't work that way. There is so much that they have to do. Quick story about a KC-135 that my son and I had the opportunity. They had stopped here. There was some weather. They landed to wait the weather out. And we got to know them, and they invited us out to the jet. We went out and visited. We just had a wonderful time for about 2 hours. They let us sit with the pilot that flies the boom, and it was just amazing. And we were talking, having a good time. And I said, when y'all are ready, you get the word to go. I said, let us know, and we will leave immediately. We don't want to be in the way. Oh, you're not in the way. They were so kind. So the word comes finally that they've been cleared and they can go. And so Grace and I jump up and we thank them profusely for their kindness and all the information and everything. And the pilot said, if you would, please just hold on for just a minute. We're going to give you and your son a headset. We want you to sit here in the cockpit with us. So we did. And he said, what we want to do is we want you to watch us go through the startup process. And we're going to start all 4 engines. And as soon as we get all 4 engines started, then we'll give you the thumbs up and you can go down this ladder and go out to the front and around. It was amazing to watch everything, the calculations for each engine that they had to make, all the inner workings of what they had to do to get that aircraft started and get it ready to go for takeoff. And then as soon as they did, he gave us the thumbs up. We went down the ladder and out. We flagged them off from there. And even beyond that, what they did, each crew member gave us a patch. They were all different. The boomer himself, the one that flies the boom, gave us his patch. And what was interesting is the pilot told me whenever the boomer gave us his patch, he said, I don't know what to say about that. He said, boomers never give their patches up. And I mean, and it was such an honor. And we've got them framed up in the house to this day. It's interesting to be able to see the workings of what all of you in the military do, like you were talking about with the 53. It would be so fascinating to watch your preparation. You don't just get in and start it and go. There's so much involved, the pre-flight checks and then actually getting the aircraft started and everything being like it's supposed to be. It is such a process to be able to see that and really appreciate the professionalism and the dedication, the job that each of you do. It was just fascinating.
Dave, I'm really glad you told that story because, and this is kind of the cool thing about this interview, is you're triggering memories that I've genuinely not had in a very long time. So if it's all right, I want to tell the story, but you're absolutely right. It is really kind of cool when you can share that with people. So for folks that don't know, again, I flew the 53 in the U.S. Navy, the MH-53 Echo, the Sea Dragon, based on the East Coast of the U.S. It was a little bit of a lift, believe it or not, to get, for example, I'm from Tennessee, to get back to Tennessee. At the end of my time flying the 53, I had the chance to take one back to Knoxville, which is not only my hometown, but an airport I spent a lot of time on taking pictures. And so it was kind of weird being on the other side of the looking glass as the guy bringing a military aircraft in instead of the guy hanging out by the FBO to try to take pictures of one. But the reason I mention it is a really good friend and mentor, and he happened to actually be there that day at the airport, Lieutenant Brad Lund of the Tennessee Highway Patrol. True American hero, just a great human being in every way. Obviously, I can't take him flying in the helicopter, but kind of like what you described, in this case, it was the opposite. Instead of startup, it was shutdown. And so I kind of had one of the air crewmen run out on the long cord, waved him in, and had him just jump in the seat and, he had hearing protection, and he can't hear what we're doing. He can just kind of see, fired the APU, shut the helicopter down. It was really kind of cool and strange. I don't know how to describe it, but this is someone that gave me some really incredible opportunities very early on in aviation, before I was in the military, before I'd gone to OCS, before any of that stuff. But you talked about trust earlier, right? He had trusted me to be around some of those things that had very impactful meaning to me. And some of those stories I still tell about him and all the great people at THP, to then be like, hey, jump in my helicopter. I can't take you flying, but I can at least show you a little bit of it. And we went out and got lunch and all that later. But it was super, super cool and super, super meaningful. So I'm glad. Again, let's be honest, right? As a military aircrew, you're taking a little bit of a risk. Let's say, I don't know, even just something innocent happens, something bad happens, and someone's going to say, why did you have a civilian on the aircraft? What the heck was going on? So there is a little bit of a risk factor there, but also good on them for sharing that experience. That's really neat.
Yeah, again, you lead me into another story. And that's what's so cool about the community, that then you get to meet them like Nick and I get to, and my son, before he grew up and is off on his own and had joined the military. It's so amazing to get to see what they do, to let them explain it to you. And I guess my story off of yours, which you made me think about, the Arkansas National Guard, Army National Guard, which I've gotten real close to because they fly their UH-60s quite often into Fort Smith and do a lot of work out at our Fort Chaffee that's not too far from the airport. They had told me a month ahead, they said, hey, we're bringing a big group in. Will you be able to be out there? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely, I'll be there. And the day came, and for special occasions, I don't do it all the time, but for special occasions, I've actually got an Uncle Sam suit that I wear to be really patriotic. And I break it out for units that I know that are going on deployment or just some special occasion. I decided to wear the suit for this particular opportunity that they were coming in. So I was all set up. They come in, and the actual day that they came in, and this was a year ago, was Flag Day. And so they came in and ended up just one UH-60 came in, which was fine. One or more, it doesn't matter. One's as important as 20, but, the more the better for me, because I want to meet as many of my military as I can to thank them. So they get out of the helicopter, and all of a sudden, I bet there's probably 12 people get out of the helicopter, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that's a lot of folks. So I didn't have enough flags with me right there, so I was going to run and get some other flags. Well, they stopped me and said, Dave, where are you going? And I said, well, I've got to get some more flags. I've got them inside. And they said, well, no, just stop. But, what it had taken them a year to put this together. They had come in, and Nick was a part of this too, Nick Thomas, my friend, and he said it was the hardest thing he had done to keep it secret. But they actually had come in to honor me, which was just incredibly humbling. And they gave Nick and I certificates and a medal, and it was just incredible. And I was having a hard time keeping it together. And so I just told them after everything was done, I thanked them profusely and said, I just don't have the words to thank you for this. I'll never forget this as long as I live. And then Matthew, the lead pilot, he said, well, Dave, there's something else that we've got to tell you. And we're going to take you and Nick up in the helicopter. We loaded up. They put me on the right gunner door, and they put Nick on the left gunner door. And he told me, he said, this is not going to be just a flight of just flying around real. No, he said, you're actually going to go, we're going to go on a mission. He said, we're going to do it's called the Nap of the Earth mission. And he said, that's what we're going to do. And he said, it'll last about 45 minutes. And he said, any of you that love roller coasters, he said, you're going to love this, because he said, it's better than any roller coaster ride you've ever been on. Well, for me, I don't do good on roller coasters. I'm really bad at the roller coasters. But, I decided, you know what? I'm not going to get sick. I'm not going to throw up. I'm not going to ruin this. So we went up, and it was incredible. I could not believe what the Black Hawk could do. We were going around a mountain ridge. All of a sudden, there was a buzzard that popped out the other side. Well, Matt had to pull back, and we went, almost straight up to miss this bird. And he got back on the radio and said, I'm really sorry about that. He said, we had a buzzard that was not going to move, and we had to move. But it was an incredible experience to actually go up and do a mission with them in the helicopter. It wasn't just a fly around. It was an actual training mission that they were working on. And so that was incredible. And I had a deeper appreciation for you and what you do in flying, because I had never experienced anything like that in my life. And I understand the Black Hawk is smaller than the 53 that you flew, but still a lot of the same principles. But it was an amazing time, and we still talk about it to this day. That was like a year ago, a little over a year ago. It was just fascinating to see them working along with the incredible flying that we were doing. That's one thing that I will never, ever forget that.
That's awesome. And again, maybe the bottom line of this whole episode is trust. They wouldn't have trusted you with such a cool experience if you hadn't had that incredible reputation and done so many things over the years and continue to do so. So that's really neat that they gifted you that. And you mentioned the Army. So I want to try to go through all the different services and maybe tell at least a couple stories. But every type model series, right? And in many cases, maybe not every unit in the United States military, but a lot of them have passed through. So Army specifically. So I'm thinking I've seen 47s, I've seen 60s, I've seen Apaches. The 160th obviously has passed through the airport a couple times, but any good stories on the Army side as we kind of paint the landscape here of all the aircraft that have passed through over the years?
Oh, absolutely. Again, thanks for the question. There's one special group. They're all special to me, but one particular group that I've gotten very close to over the years, the Spartans, which fly the 47 out of New Century, Kansas. They come down and work with us a lot down here. So I've gotten to know them very well. And they went on deployment. This was a few years back, but they went on deployment. Of course, one of my greatest joys, it's just absolutely, I love doing this, is sending packages to the unit when they go on deployment. And I've gotten to send to the Army, to the Marines, to the Navy. The only branch I've never gotten to send to was the Air Force. Apparently, they take such good care of them. Every time I talk to the Air Force personnel that are going on deployment, they say, well, Dave, thank you very much, but they give us pretty much everything we need. The other branches were like, yeah, that would be great, which I'm glad so that I can send. It's always a joy to get packages together. And my packages are a little different. There's food and all that kind of stuff, but I send action figures and all kinds of different things because I want them to get a laugh and a smile and something that lets them know that they really are appreciated and that we're thinking about them constantly and, are praying for them and just everything that we can do for them and their families. And so that unit, the Spartans, they actually flew a flag for me in combat and had it framed and put up, which I'm very fortunate. The units I've met over the years, and I say this not in any kind of, please understand, not a braggy way, but very honored way. that I've had 21 different flags that different units, Navy, Marine, Army, Air Force, have flown for me in combat and brought back to me. That, like I say, all of them are framed up and in our house. My wife is she's been wonderful to let me put things up and to put up with her cooking dinner, and then we don't get to show up because we're at the airport, and she's been really understanding. But to have those special kind of things, it's incredible that they would take the time to do something like that for just a civilian. But with the Army, that's a group that I'm very close to. Another group that is really, with all of them that come through my Arkansas Army National Guard, are very special to me. The little birds will come in to visit us from time to time, and that's a fascinating unit when they come in. There's always an instructor pilot with a trainee. What's interesting about that is the instructor pilots are a little bit younger than me, and I'm in my mid-60s. And so there's a lot of experience to meet a lot of Vietnam veterans there that flew in the Vietnam War. And that's really cool. So from the Army side, my head's just swimming to tell you different stories. There's just so many wonderful units that I've met, the H-64s, the Apaches. Used to be the Kiowas, the 58s. They've gone away now, which I hate. I hate it when any platform goes away, but I know that's just the way things are now, and everything's kind of going to one. I'll end with this one with the Army. There was a Chinook unit that came in a few years back that worked with us for about a week, and then they were leaving, and I had taken pictures of them and stuff, and they asked me, they said, hey, Flag Dave, could you take some pictures of us when we take off? We're going to come back around in the pattern, and we're going to hold this American flag out the back as we fly by. And could you take some pictures and send them to us? I said, oh, absolutely. And so they did. They took off and then went around the pattern and came back around. And so I got shots of them while they were holding the American flag out the back of the helicopter. And like I say, I love it when they ask me to do something, because I don't want to be overbearing, but it's just, I want them to understand that anything I can do as a civilian to give back is huge, because we as civilians are totally in debt to every one of you in the military. And so to be able to do anything, even if it's a small thing, is so huge.
You mentioned the little birds and specifically Task Force 160th, the folks that pass through. So traditionally, right, I mean, there's Fort Campbell, there's Savannah, Georgia, and then there's McChord in Washington, where they're all based. But usually when they're passing through, like you said, it is the training headed out west to do mountain flying. So I know you have seen 47s, I know you've seen 60s, DAPs, AH-6s, MH-6s, everything on the flight line. And like I said, it's all about trust. Line military units, guard units, whatever. There's always a little bit different level of sensitivity, right? But when you're talking about folks that support Tier 1 operators and some of the most unique flying, and I jokingly say it, but like they are the best helicopter pilots in the military. And I say this as a Navy helicopter pilot, and I'll defend it, right? Because they are man-trained and equipped at the highest level to do some of the most meaningful and important missions. But I've been shooed away before, taking photos of them, and there's a reason why, and I get it, right? By the same token, that's not the case at Fort Smith, and so it's really neat that you've had those relationships and stayed in touch with some of these folks, because like you said, there's that continuity. Some of the people there are in their 60s, it's still as IPs and still train the next generation, and that's kind of unique. Not a lot of military units have that level of continuity.
It's interesting to see the respect that is shown from the younger trainees that are following along with what the IPs are showing them. But it's also fun to watch them, not in the, quote, professional realm that they stay in a lot of times. They're laughing and joking and having fun. And, it's fun to see that relaxed side of them also. I mean, I'm kind of skipping now from that to a Navy story. This was probably 15 years ago at least. But we had 3 Blue Angels come in. They had left a show and they were coming in to get gas and just going to make a stop to eat and get fuel. They landed and we brought them right up next to the FBO. And so they came in. They were so nice, just so relaxed, and they just sitting around, and like, you're used to seeing, especially the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, they're snappy and they're straight-laced and everything is, but they were just having fun, laughing and talking with us, and we were just having a great time. And so just before they left, Commander Foley came down to me and he said, Dave, one of the other Blue Angel pilots was upstairs checking weather and doing things, and they had already done this, and then said, don't say anything, but we're going to go ahead and leave, okay? Don't tell. He was talking about the pilot upstairs. And I said, oh, okay. And so he said, thanks. And he said, great to meet you. And then off they went. Well, they were in the jets starting them up. Well, here come their friend down. And he said, I hate it when they do that to me. They always make me go do this, and then they run off and leave me. And they were just laughing. But they were just having a great time and still very professional. But it was so cool to see them in that type of an atmosphere. Just being able to relax and visit with us and laugh. And we were telling jokes. And it was just really cool to see that.
For sure. And that's a good one. That's pretty, yeah, like you said, you see the Blues at an air show, or in the recent movie that just came out, right, there's a very, dyed-in-the-wool perception that we have of them, and then getting to see them in that more relaxed way. That's what it is, right? Like we are the country that we defend. Like we're nothing special. We're just Americans like anybody else, and that's good and bad. But it's kind of cool to, like you said, kind of look behind the scenes. I was curious. I wanted to ask. I had this experience very early on, actually, again at Knoxville, taking pictures. But I was wondering if you had the same one. This specific kind of the F-18. So since you mentioned the blues, that's why it jumped out at me. The boarding ladder. So I remember, again, I think it was like a Charlie model F-18 out of VFA 106, headed back east. It was a Delta model, a two-seat jet. That's what it was. And great memory. I don't know why, just something about the two-seat, the classic Legacy Hornet looks great to me. And it was a single pilot jumping in the jet, and hey, good to take pictures, all that stuff. And I remember, kind of like you said, is there anything you need before you go? Not knowing what the heck I could do to help this guy. And he goes, well, yeah, actually, would you mind putting my boarding ladder up? And I said, sure. Will you show me how to do that? And so, yeah, absolutely no. So he kind of shows me how to disconnect, pull the little piece back. There is a little bit of an art to it. You can mess it up, by the way. He kind of looked over the Lex, the leading extension. Yep, okay, you did it right. Sounds great, man. Jumps in the jet. Thanks again. And got some cool photos as they blasted off chasing the sun. But the reason I mention it was I remember thinking as a younger person at the time, you don't know who I am. Like I say I'm a pilot. I say I'm a military aviation enthusiast. I'm right next to the inlet. You're letting me touch the airplane. I mean, I could break something. I could do something wrong. And yet, oh yeah, no, like you're one of the people, right? You're one of, you're not really one of us, but you are. And I'm going to give you that level of trust. And even as a young person, I remember that. I remember thinking how freaking cool it was and how much I appreciated it. And, I don't know if that happens these days anymore. Maybe, maybe not. It is what it is, I guess.
Well, you ask good questions. I'll tell you that. That just happened a week ago. So, yeah, sometimes I try to not do anything, especially if the FBO personnel are there and they can do it. But there's sometimes that if it's a new person especially and they're not sure, I can do it and show them how to do it. And you're right. You can do it wrong, and it's tricky. That it has to go back up, and those clips have to fit perfectly and be smooth when you do it. It's just got to be placed just right. It can be temperamental. But yeah, it's I've gotten to do that a number of times, and to be able to do something in the trust factor, like you said, is just, it makes you feel so proud because like, hey, I get to do something on the jet. It's very basic and very simple, but it's still you're helping and you're doing something. So I get what you're saying so much about when you did it and you're like, oh, wow, that was so cool, because it really is. You realize, wow, how many civilians are lucky enough to get to actually be a part and help do something on a fighter jet. And you're right, the Charlie, that's a cool jet. Of course, unfortunately, we're seeing less and less of them because they're transitioning to either the Super Hornet or the F-35 in the units from the Marines, especially. I think the Marines are the only ones now, I guess, that still have the Charlie. But you're right. It's a great memory. And I'm glad you told that story because I can connect to that with you. That's really cool.
And you're right. I think, probably the last Charlie I saw was a Marine bird going from depot. So I don't remember if it was east or west, but it was at NAS Pensacola. And it was actually kind of crazy, right? So we think of the FA-18 Charlie as these old airplanes that don't really exist in the military inventory. And this one was fresh paint, and it just looked beautiful in every way. And I remember thinking like, wow, this might be one of the last times I see one of these jets looking as nice as that. Another story, I was at Miramar for, I want to say it was 2022 probably. They have a lot of jets on the flight line, and a lot of them are wind chimes. So the engines are taken out, the seats are taken out, and they're kind of slowly preserving a core group of the airplanes that have the least amount of flight hours as their squadrons continue for how many more years we don't know. But it was weird seeing this balance of like a bunch of really nice looking jets on the line that the Marines were flying the heck out of every day, and then the other, the giving tree, right? The jets that are being taken apart to use for parts to keep those other aircraft up. Again, as the airplane transitions out of the Marine Corps inventory and into history, as they say. But yeah, it's that's really cool. Okay, so we're talking Navy, talking naval aviation. Have you ever seen the Tomcat? I'm trying to put the time and space together. I know you mentioned the Prowler has come through the airport. Those are all sadly gone. Navy and Marine Corps have sunset. Any Tomcat, or was that before your time?
The Tomcat was just probably 2 years maybe before I began to come out. I have actually got to set in a Tomcat. At one of our air shows, we had a Tomcat, and they actually had it set up to where you could climb up the ladder and on the ramp and actually sit down in it. And I sat down with my son at the time, which was Oh, goodness. He was very young, probably about 2 years old. But as far as getting to see him there, no, it didn't get to, unfortunately. And I've talked to some of the personnel at the FBO that were there then, and they talked about when the F-14s would come in, how incredible it was to watch them land and then, of course, take off. And so, no, unfortunately, I missed them just by a couple of years, but I would have loved to have seen one, because I've talked to so many of the pilots that I've met, especially that are in the Super Hornets over the years, not so much here lately, but in the past. So many were Tomcat pilots before, of course, transitioning to the Super Hornet. Stories they tell about the F-14. Was lucky and fortunate enough to meet Dale Snodgrass. He was flying A4s for ATAC, one of the civilian aggressor squadrons. And of course, he flew Tomcats. He flew, I believe, the F-86 in air shows, and it was fascinating talking to him, and he was just an encyclopedia of information on the Tomcat. So I am sorry to say I did miss him by just a little bit, but would have loved to have seen him.
Well, same here. And again, I think maybe as a little kid, I probably saw one fly, but unfortunately, I don't remember it. They're relegated to probably just museums and memories in my brain. But the reason I mentioned it, Top Gun, we all think of the movie, the first one anyway, and the Tomcat. But I know you've had a lot of aviators, Top Gun graduates, right, wearing the patch on the shoulder, but also actually some of the folks that fly at Top Gun pass through, and some of the aggressor pilots, like you already mentioned. Any good stories or any good memories there?
Oh, wow. You hit a nugget on that one. One of the very, very, very first pilots that, when my son was going with me, that we met, call sign Ferg. We still stay in touch to this day. Wonderful, wonderful patriot. He was flying an F5 into Fort Smith and didn't know him at the time, but I would just show up after I got off work. I would go out to the airport just to see if anything was there. And here's this F5 sitting out on the tarmac. And I walk in to the FBO, and here's the pilot not too far in the door. And so, of course, I'm heading right toward him. And he kind of puts his hands on me and says, "Sir," he said, because I had my hand out to shake his hand, and he said, "You may not want to get around me right now." He said, "I just took a bath in jet fuel," and he said, "I am soaked in it, and you could smell it." I just asked him, "Oh, no." I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I was doing a walk around," and he said, "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the plane vented," because it was a hot day, and it vented all this fuel on him. And so he was just, bless his heart, he was soaked in it. But, he dried out some, and we started visiting and got to know each other. And, he left, when he left, and then I always give a little, with the flags, I try to give him it's a little thank you card, and it's got a little thank you message on it with my email. He emails me back, talks about, "Hey, it was really nice to meet you, and just thank you for coming out, and just so kind." And I said, "Oh, absolutely." I said, it's such an honor to meet y'all, and thank you for what you do." And so anyways, we started talking, and so he calls me one night. "Hey," he said, "I'm coming through tomorrow." He said, "Can you and Race be out there at about 2:00 in the afternoon?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll get him out of school. We'll be there." And so he shows up and lands. This F5 he's flying is black as night. It's just jet black. And so he comes and gets us, and we go out, and he says, "Now look, I want you to do me a favor. You two go out there." And he said, "I want you to love on my F5. He said, "I want you to hug her. I want you to kiss her. I want you to tell her all these good things, man, how awesome she is. Because I'm taking her to Florida, and she's going on a stick. I think she knows that that's what's going to happen. So she's been giving me troubles coming out from west to east." He said, "This jet actually is one of the MiG-28s from the original Top Gun movie." And he said, "So help me, like I say, build her up so that she'll make it on down to Florida for me." But that was really cool. We got to, actually got to meet a jet from the first movie. And then we got real close with him. And like I said, we still stay in touch today. But that was such a neat thing to actually get to meet a movie jet.
Wow. So yes, again, incredible. It's an airplane that's part of history. It's so interesting, right? So you said Ferg. I think it's the same person, right? So Captain Brian Ferguson, and he's pretty well known now, at least in the military aviation community. He was the lead technical advisor on Top Gun. There's all sorts of stuff you can find on the internet, great interviews with him as well. I had no idea that you two knew each other. That's so freaking cool. So man, the first movie, and then his connection with the second one as well. Very cool.
Yeah, and the second movie, that's something that, again, I never dreamed that would happen either. And it wasn't so much with Ferg on this one. When we visited, we had talked about the movie, and he was telling me about it before it ever came out. Of course, I got to see him at Tailhook in 19, and we talked about it. It was interesting. Another real dear friend of mine, Matt Gottschalk, I believe it's down at Pensacola now, is where he's at. He was out at Fallon at the time when the FBO sent me out to Tailhook, and Fallon's, about an hour and a half from Reno. And he told me, he said, well, when he found out we were coming, he said, hey, you've got to come out so that I can take you around Top Gun out here. And so I was like, wow, absolutely. So we drove down the next day, and he took us out and introduced us to all the aggressor pilots, the Saints, the SC-13. And the cool thing about it was he took us out on the tarmac. It was like a dream come true. There were jets everywhere, F-5s, these Super Hornets, there was Charlies, there were every kind of Navy plane, prop and jet that was out there. It was just crazy. And guess what? One jet was sitting on the tarmac. It actually landed and then parked not too far from us. It was Maverick's plane from the new movie. Of course, this was in 19, so of course the movie hadn't been released yet, and they were still kind of keeping a lot of things quiet. And so I asked Matt, it parked, they basically buttoned her up, and, she was just sitting there. And I said, Matt, is there any chance that I can go over and just touch the jet? Because I got to meet a jet from the first movie. And he said, yeah. He said, I think so. So we walked down, and I got up to the nose, and I was just kind of rubbing the nose. I'm like, wow, this is actually the movie jet. And then I hear this voice out of nowhere that says, hey, this real kind of angry voice, what are you doing? And so I stopped and looked around, and it was a maintainer that was underneath the airplane. I was so enamored I didn't see him. And I said, oh, I am so sorry. Excuse me. And then Matt was right there, and he said, it's okay. He said, he's with me. And he said, oh, okay, sir. And so I thought, oh, no, I've gotten in trouble. But it was cool to meet that jet. So that was something I was not expecting that happened, which is still, is a great memory to me.
Well, and again, Dave, you bring up a really good point, right? It's not just the people on the planes, right? But these things, as time goes on, I mean, you met Ferg roughly 05, 06 timeframe. We talked about it. And then, 2019, 2020, he's, the CO of Training Squadron, they're the Saints, right? He goes on to work on the movie. What I'm getting at is that, like, as the career progresses, you've stayed in touch with these people. We have stayed in touch together as well, but you have with so many, luminaries in military aviation, naval aviation, whatever you want to say. One of the things I know we talked about as well, before we kind of recorded the interview here, you have had the privilege of meeting a lot of folks, specifically in this case, naval aviators that went on to fly for the Blues, but you met them when they were just students in the T-45. Any good stories there?
That's been such a wonderful thing to watch the progression, especially when they're flying the 45s, the Goshawks, and they come in and you get to know them. I try not to ever be pushy. There's a number of 45s that have come in over the years that later on they became Blue Angels, and even beyond that, they became incredible aviators in their field, whether it was flying an 18 or be at the 35 now. One story I remember real well of all those that's really cool is one of my real dear friends, Nate Barton, Billy is his call sign, I believe. He was flying Growlers when they came out and started flying those. And he came in one day, and like you said, I'll make a point to something that you had said earlier about our location. Out of Whidbey Island, the 18s and the Gladiators, you were talking about 106, out of East or West Coast and Whidbey Island, they all told us over the years our location is almost perfect for them on cross countries. And so we can get them and get to see them and help them and support them. But Nate had come in, and so we were visiting. It was good to see him again, and we were just having a good visit. He said, well, Dave, Nick, he said, I've got something to tell you. And he said, just keep me in your prayers about this. And I said, okay. And we said, yeah, what is it, Nate? And he said, well, I'm going to rush for the Blue Angels. Nick and I were like, really? That's so awesome. He said, well, don't get your hopes up. He said, they're not going to take a Growler guy. Nick and I just looked at him and said, well, of course they are. It's you. You're going to make it. And, of course, he ends up making the team. And then while he was on the team, our family took a vacation down to Pensacola. And he took us around and showed us. And of course, the year that we went down, it was when they were doing the sequestration, the year that the Angels didn't really fly. They kind of had them grounded, and which was really a shame. But he introduced us to everybody, and we got to go in the room where the Blue Angels meet and do their planning and see all the cool stuff. It was incredible experience. But it was so cool that you could see it in his face when he was saying, they're not going to take a Growler guy. And then he got it, and he was perfect for of course, any Blue Angel, any Thunderbird, they're perfect for the job because the process they go through for them to be on the team is so detailed and so rigorous. But he just had a wonderful time, of course, doing that. And he was perfect. And I ended up getting to go to Dallas or Fort Worth, I guess, to the Joint Air Base down there and actually watch him fly. And that was one of the few air shows, if you've got a VIP, which he had given me a VIP pass. And And they'll, at the end of the show, they'll park a Blue Angel plane. You can go out and have your picture made with the team next to the plane. And he told me, he said, now, Dave, when they do this, he said, it's like a cattle call. There was probably 50 of us that were going to get to do this. He said, they'll run you right in and you just stand there and they'll take the picture and then out you go. So that's okay. And so I, got my picture made with Nate and the team against the Blue Angel, which is really cool. But for him to achieve that dream, like so many of the others that I've had the honor to meet over the years, and not just that, but also to see the dreams that they dreamed from the start and to see that come true for them over the years as you get to see them from time to time again over the years is just fascinating and so uplifting because of the hard work that it took for them to achieve whatever it was that they ended up achieving, especially with one of the flight teams, but also just in their career to reach the places that they reach by the hard work and dedication that they've got to put into it, just like that you did to do the same thing that you did. You took a lot of hard work and dedication and a lot of sleepless nights. And so it's neat to let them know how much we appreciate that. That's stuff that we don't actually get to see that y'all are going through, but we know that you do. And I always joke with the pilots that, hey, I've read your book. There's a book out, How to Be a Naval Aviator, and there's one, How to Be an Air Force Aviator. And I've read both books, and it's like, I just want to pull my hair out when I get about not even halfway through it. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, how do y'all... But then there you go. That's just the dedication of excellence that is our military. It's just a cool thing to watch that happen.
Well, Dave, since you mentioned the Blues, again, triggered a memory, wanted to make sure we talked about the time that we had the chance to watch the team fly and hang out in Pensacola. So I know you remember the story. I was hoping maybe you could tell it for us.
We decided to make a trip to Florida, and I asked my wife, I said, hey, one of my best buddies is down there. I said, sir, would you mind if I let him know we were coming? And, I would love to just see him, not get in his way. I know he's busy, but, just say hi. I said, because I had never got to meet you in person, and I was so excited. And she said, well, of course. So unbeknownst to me, we set the plans up and we make it down. And, of course, you are so gracious to make time to see us. But not only did you make time to see us, you set it up to where you took us around the whole base and showed us the most interesting things. It was just a wonderful time. And then, of course, the Angels were practicing. You took us out to this great watch spot, and we were all excited. If I remember right, it was 9:30, 10 in the morning or something like that. And this thunderstorm would start popping up. They went ahead and took off, but the show didn't really get going because the thunderstorms moved in. And it was, it would have been great to get to see them fly their whole show. But we were just grateful that, again, and I'm trying not to wax too poetic and embarrass you too much, but I think most people that hear your podcast I'll say this. All those that have listened to your podcast, the guests that you've had, I will say this, anybody that has not met Antonio, he's exactly what you think he is. He's that kind, he's that nice, he's that accommodating. He's just an incredible individual, and it's an honor to know him. And like I say, for him to do for us as a family what he did, to take his time out of his busy day to make sure to show us around and let us see things that most don't get to see, even to the point that an F-18 lands close to where we were at, just a regular unit, not a Blue. And I asked Antonio, hey, Antonio, I've got some flags. Is it possible that I could give the pilot some flags? And, of course, he says, well, sure. And so he gets me through the gate to where they're at and takes me in, and I get to give the two pilots their my little flags and to thank them and their families for what they're doing for us. And he didn't have to do that. I mean, that took some extra trouble to do it, but he did. So I appreciated that so much, along with all the other things that you did for us on that trip. It was just an incredible and wonderful experience. And like I said, I'll say this again, shouldn't repeat myself, but I'm going to say this one more time. He is who you think he is. He's just an incredible, wonderful individual that's very caring and will give you not only the time, but he's one of the kinds, as you've heard, would give you the shirt off his back. He's that kind of an individual. So it's an absolute honor to have him as a friend, and I'm very proud of him and his accomplishments and his kindness and time to my family and I.
That was an awesome day, and I really do appreciate you saying that. It was a really fun time. You're being very generous. First off, it was my pleasure to get to hang out with y'all. Second, that weather in Pensacola, man, I wasn't going to be flying a T-6 that day anyway because it was pretty rough, as I recall. And like you said, they launched. I think we got a couple passes out of them. We got to watch in front of base ops, and then they were done. So, it's kind of how some of those practices would go. So I would much rather be hanging out with you and your wonderful wife than sitting in the squadron at VT-10 at the time, probably filling out paperwork or something else. So it was a great day. It was great to show you the base. Like, that's one of the things I really enjoyed, is taking folks. At the time, as I recall, the museum was still closed. At the time, I don't know that the public could get on the base to watch practices. There were a couple years there where after the shooting and then after the hurricane, just in COVID and a lot of stuff had all happened, and unfortunately base access was kind of limited. It's opened back up now so the public can get on and see the Blues practices, and much to the consternation of all of us that work there at times, clog up all the lanes of traffic getting in and out of the base. But it's a first world problem. We enjoy it. Anyway, no, that was a great day. That was a lot of fun. You mentioned the transient line. The team over there led by Brian Smith, wonderful gentleman. When I was a student at Pensacola, and I want to say this was probably 2015, 2016 timeframe, I spent a lot of time on their line taking photos, and Brian was just one of the guys. And I say one of the guys. He was there for Katrina. He was there for all these different things. His career in the military as a Navy aircrewman is legendary, and we're hoping to do a podcast soon as well. But anyway, he was one of the guys there. Now he's the manager. He runs the place. And so that has been super freaking cool. I've been very fortunate. They've trusted me to be on their flight line and take pictures, and then also, know when not to share the photos. There's been stuff that has come through, and he's like, yeah, man, not today. And I'm like, absolutely, got it. And I miss that a lot. I miss getting to spend time with him and his team and some of the wonderful people there in Pensacola. So yeah, getting to get you out there, I mean, that was easy. It's easy to get out the gate. They give that code to anybody. But I'm kidding, of course. But truly, that was really, really cool. So, okay, I want to make sure, again, we got so many stories to get to. But while I'm thinking about it, we talked about the Navy, Naval Aviation. You know several of the Blues, past and present, like we talked about that long connection to it. I haven't really talked about the Marines a whole bunch, but I know you have a story with the Marine Corps, and especially some of the, I think it was the Whiskey Model Cobras, the older generation Cobras.
Yes, the Marines, they're such a great group. Whether they're flying the jets or the helicopters, they're just a lot of fun. The Marine pilots and crews are. This particular story I'm going to tell is one that it really hit me in the heart because of the way that it lays out. I had met this particular group, and I'd always ask them when I meet the crews coming through, the air crews, are you going to be going on deployment anytime soon, or when you go on deployment? I said, please, here's my thank you card. It's got my info on it. I said, please let me know. I said, I will not bother you or bug you, but I said, I'd just like to know, especially when you go on deployment, so that I can send you packages. So he was very kind, and he said, are you sure? And I said, oh, please. I said, yes. I said, you don't know how happy it makes me to get to do that. So I said, please let me know. He said, in a few months, he said, we are actually going on deployment in the combat zone. And I said, okay. I said, I promise you, if you email me, like I tell all my pilots and crews, you will not be getting a bunch of emails from me. I won't be bugging you, but I just want to be there to help in any way possible for you and your families, if anything that I can do. And so it was probably 2.5 months. I get an email, and he says, Dave, we're on station now. And he gave me the address, and he said, we would love that. Thank you very much. I said, thanks for letting me know. And I said, could you tell me, if there's anything that you need? I can send the regular things, that normally are in packages. But I said, is there anything specific that you need? And he sends back an email, and he says, yeah. He said, actually, now that you've asked, could you send us duct tape? He said, actually, the more you can send, the better. And I sent back and I said, well, absolutely. I can send duct tape and, everything else. So I did, fixed up the packages and sent them. And about a month and a half later, I get an email, because it takes a while for packages. Even when I send to the carriers, it's usually a month or better before I hear if they got them. It takes a while to go through the process that they've got set up to do that. He sent back and says, Dave, thank you so much. We got the package, and, they're great. And thanks for the duct tape. And so I sent back to him, and I said, well, thank you so much for letting me know that you got the packages. But I said, I've got to ask you, duct tape, why do you want duct tape? And so I think it was a day or two later, he sends back and he says, well, for us, he said, we're forward deployed in the desert. So they're out in the middle of nowhere. And our sleep schedules are not... they're just really messed up. And he said, so what we do is the little hooches that we build, we take the duct tape and we can put it over the creases where the light gets through and the dust and everything else. And he said, it kind of helps keep the dust down. And even though it's still going to get in, but it makes it a little better. Plus, he said it can darken things so that we can sleep better. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, here I am as a civilian, and whatever complaint I may have during the day, picket, for any of us as civilians, what it might be. And then here are my fellow brothers and sisters that are out in a desert somewhere in this oppressive heat that are being called out to go fight an enemy that wants our demise, and they're doing this, and all they're asking for is duct tape so that it helps them sleep better and then keep the dust out of it. And it was so humbling to hear that, because it made me realize, wow, that's something that I would have never thought of. I was very curious about the duct tape, but I had no idea until he told me. And just to think the hardships that so many of you in the military go through at times for us as civilians, and nobody ever knows, or very few people know, maybe just the families or close friends, but the nation as a whole, they don't. And it really shook me. During that time, I got to send them lots of packages and lots of duct tape. And so apparently it worked out and they liked it. So I was real glad, but very humbled again to think that, hey, they're out there doing this in the middle of nowhere and fighting a battle and just doing it and not complaining, doing their job. They're not in the best situations with where they were at, but they were out there taking care of us. So that was really cool.
Well, that's so cool that you got to take care of them and help out in that way. And one thing I don't know that people realize necessarily, even in my current job right now, like today we, in the freaking hangar bay, on the phone, on eBay, finding something that we needed, a part in this case, and just buying it ourselves. And is that always the right answer? No, it's probably not. Should it be that way? No. The U.S. government spends a lot of money on our military, and in many ways it is incredibly well spent, some of the capability and technology and stuff that's out there, right? These things are expensive, and that's how we pay for them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes just members of the military, right? We just got to get it done. And so sometimes, yeah, we are actually spending our own money on some of this stuff, small or large. So yeah, even just a roll of duct tape, that makes a big difference. We're swinging through the jungle of knowledge here. The story's all over the place, but I hope folks can kind of forgive us for that and keep up with it. But looking at the notes, I know one of the other things that we hadn't hit on yet, you mentioned Tailhook briefly, but the convention itself, I know you had a chance to go out. What year was that you got to go out to Tailhook?
The first one was in 2019. Then also 20 after that. And then, of course, COVID kind of knocked it out after that. Tailhook was just, I had no idea what to expect. The FBO had asked me, and it was another one of those shocking moments where you're like, am I dreaming? Don't wake me up. Carol had called me into her office at the FBO and said, Dave, would you be willing to go out to Reno, Nevada to the Tailhook convention? And I knew what Tailhook was. I mean, of course, I'd never been, but I knew what it was. I just said, is this a joke? I mean, I really was. I was like, Carol, this isn't funny. Don't dangle this in front of me. And she said, no. She said, the company wants to send you with us to go out and be in our booth. And I was like, oh, that would be incredible. Yes. So I would love to. And so we flew out. And of course, they paid for my flight, for my hotel, food. I don't think I spent a dime while I was out there. So the FBO was so cool. It was TACAIR at the time. That was just incredible. But we set the booth up, and basically what they wanted me to do was just greet people, because that's basically what I do at the FBO, is greet the military when they come in. And I had been working on, for months, as many flags as I could make to take out there, because I knew that probably couldn't make enough flags because there's so many military men and women that are out there. And it's like, I've joked with you before that for me, from the very first Top Gun movie, you hear Tom Cruise when he's in the bar, and he talks about a target-rich environment. Well, when I got out there, it's just a massive setup, but it was just full of the military, Navy and Marine military personnel. And I was just, that's why I said I was in a target-rich environment, because it was just a dream come true. And so to get to meet them and thank them and give them a flag. Most of them, of course, a lot of them didn't know who I was. Some that came to our booth had heard about Fort Smith and asked about, is Flag Dave here? And then they would say, well, yeah, he's right here. And so it was cool that people would ask, because to get to meet folks that had asked like that was really an incredible experience. And to get to give them a flag and to thank them for what they're doing. And so the whole experience was just it was just unbelievable. At one point, there's giveaways. Each booth they'd give away things, and we were so busy, we ran out of stuff to give away at that time, and we had to get some more was stored away. But I remembered that one of the other booths had these big posters that they had made up for Top Gun, because it was the 50th year of Top Gun. So got some of those posters and went over and asked Carol and the crew, I said, can we lay these out? And I said, I've got Sharpies. and have the pilots and crew sign those when they come over, because we can put them up in the FBO. And so that's what we did. They would come over. I'd ask them, say, would you mind signing our poster? And of course they were like, really? Which goes back to another story at our local FBO that I could talk about. I get autographs and stuff all the time off magazine covers or models, or I have them sign all kinds of stuff. It's important to me to have something from each one of them that I've got in my family. But this one particular gentleman, this is out at Tailhook. He's an elderly gentleman with a cane. And his two granddaughters was with him, which they were in their probably mid-30s. But they come over and they're looking at us. I said, I said, good afternoon. I said, how are y'all doing? And they said, well, real good, thank you. And the gentleman said, well, yes, you're doing good. Thank you very much. And I said, hey, well, would you do me a favor? We're having military members sign our poster. I said, would you mind signing our poster for us? And he said, well, no. He said, I would be glad to. And so I gave him the pen, and he put his cane over on the side, and he saw my name on my tag, and he said, well, Flag Dave? He said, I'm going to sign this, but he said, I'm going to sign it a little different than I usually sign. And I said, well, yes, sir. I said, you sign that however you want. He signs the poster. So I look at it, and it's underneath his signature, it's got 4 MiG-15 kills. And so I asked him, excuse me, I said, you've got 4 MiG kills here. And he just kind of turned back around. He said, mm-hmm. And then he introduced himself to me as Royce Williams. They finally declassified this to where I could actually talk about it or sign it that way. And so I said, declassify. And he said, yeah. He said, in the Korean War, he said, I flew an F-9F Panther. And he said, I got in a fight with a huge number of MiGs that were up. And he said, I was lucky enough. He said, I shot down 4. But the MiGs I shot down didn't have Korean pilots. They had Soviet pilots. So he said that was a big deal at the time, and the United States decided not to let that out for obvious reasons. And so it was fascinating. That's just one gentleman I could tell you about. You met so many fascinating and interesting people there, but I thought it was just crazy that you meet a fighter pilot that had 4 MiG kills, and it was classified until just recently when he was able to kind of talk about it. So Tailhook itself was just, what an experience.
Well, Dave, you mentioned Carol, and you've mentioned her name a couple times. I want to make sure we kind of mention who she is and why she's so important in this whole story. So the FBO, the fixed base operator, just think of it as a gas station for the airport, right? I'm underselling what they do. They do a lot. But the FBO out at Fort Smith has been TAC Air. I believe it's Signature now. But Carol, at the time, was the manager. I think she's since gone on to retire. But I want to see if maybe you could tell us a little bit about her and the relationship you had. Because like you said, if they didn't have that trust in you, you wouldn't be out on the flight line meeting folks and taking pictures and all these other great things. So hoping maybe you could tell us about that.
Thank you so much for bringing that up and allowing me to say something there now. Carol McNally and Max Blake, the two really that got this started for me, and now, like I say, Nick's involved with me. Carol, she started working there at 18 years old and then just worked her way up until she was over the FBO eventually. She's very service-oriented. She's very taking care of the customer. Like you said, the FBO is kind of a gas station, of course, for the aircraft that come through, whether it be GA or whether it be military. But then, like you said, also, there's so many other things that an FBO does to take care of whoever it might be that comes through. But Carol, she was just fantastic. Her and Max just adopted Race and I when we first started going out there and kind of took us under their wing to show us, what we could do, what we couldn't do. The trust, it took a while to build that up, and that's something you and I have both talked about in this interview quite a bit. She saw we just wanted to get to those military members and thank them and their families for their sacrifices and for what they do for us. And it morphed into more as time went on with the flags and the other things. But we always think accomplishments in achieving things, you never do that alone. There's always other people involved, whether they're in the background or wherever it might be. There's always others, and that's what I say with this. Without, what Carol did and what Max did, to have that trust, to take a chance, to, hey, let's look and see what happens here. Max had told me one time that there was an elderly gentleman and his son. He would bring him out there, and they would sit on a bench outside the door and watch the planes. And they just watched, and that was a thing they got to do together. And he told me one day, after it was probably 2 years of us going out there, he said, I know what you're going to do, Dave. He said, you and Race, you're going to just, at some point, you're just quit coming out here. And I just remember looking at him and saying, Max, you and Carol have no idea what you started. I said, I will not leave this place unless I'm banned, unless you ban me from this. I said, there's no way, like you've talked about with the trust. And if you'll allow me, I'll make this a quick story, because I feel bad for these folks that I'm going to tell a story about. But Nick, like we talked about before with his pictures, there's so many people that know him from all over the world that send him messages and stay in touch with him. Well, he had made some friends over those last few years leading up to this. And one day, one of them, I guess, had sent him a message that said, how in the world are you getting these pictures you're taking? You're right next to the aircraft. You're right next to the pilot. It looks like you're on the flight line. Well, of course, he sent back to him and explained what we got to do, that it was very special, and we were very respectful with it, and we were very honored that we got to do it. And so what happened was there was 10 or 12 of his buddies that he had made friends with all over the United States that Nick Thomas had made friends with, and they would send stuff to him and he would send stuff to them. But they said they all started kind of seeing that, well, hey, that's a cool idea. We're going to go to our local FBOs and see if we can meet the military to thank them. And, well, as the year went on, one by one, these gentlemen would contact him back and saying, our local FBO said, no, I don't think so. Y'all just need to move along. And what it was I know that all those guys had the right intentions, but the thing was you said it, and you were so right in saying it, that there was no trust. They didn't know them. So there was no way that they were going to let somebody just come in and start. And that's what I'm saying. I'm so thrilled that TAC Air adopted me and Nick now over the years so long ago, because it was a chance they took. And Carol had that trust, and Max had that trust when Race and I first started going out, that, hey, there's something here. And it's grown because I'd always told Carol, and Nick and I both have told her this, that, look, if there's ever a time that we become some kind of a distraction instead of something that's good for you, something that presents you well, then let us know, because that's not what we want to happen. We want to be something that's good for you and not bad. And it never did. She always said, no, listen, y'all have helped us because the military pilots have gotten to know y'all, and they'll come back through, and to know that we were able to do something to help the FBO out along with everything they've done for us was, and I'll say this, Signature has embraced us also, and we're very grateful and thankful for that. As a matter of fact, got a military room that TAC Air had given me, and it was in a smaller room up on the upstairs. And when Signature had bought them, it's been, I guess, a little over a year now or so, their people came to look at the FBO and everything, and they went upstairs and they saw the military room, and one of them came back down and was telling Allie, which is the manager now, said, there's a room up there with a whole bunch of military stuff in it. That really needs to go. And said, we don't need that. And then Allie, which I've known the whole time, she's been there the whole time that we've been going out. She said, well, no, I don't think you want to do that. And she explained, and they said, well, okay. Said, well, this is what we need to do then. They took me out of the small room upstairs and gave me a big room. And so I actually got to expand my military room and put more stuff up, which is stuff that, like I said, I've got big model jets up there and pictures and stuff that I have. The pilots and crews autograph those when they come up, and then I've displayed in the room. But the FBO has just been, and like I say, I feel really bad for those that were wanting to do that at their local FBOs and weren't able, but it took a while to build the trust for them to accept us the way that they have, to know that we're going to be not any kind of a detraction to the FBO. And so much thanks to TAC Air when they were here, and then now to Signature for allowing us to continue to do what we're getting to do.
Well, I had a very similar interaction. TK at a Signature in Nashville, Tennessee. And same thing, right? Like, I was just a college student at the time, come by, hang out in the FBO. And, it's a place of business, right? There's, fancy jets passing through and people with, large net worth and military at the same time. Like it's again, I hate the word gas station or the phrase gas station, but it serves more than just military aircraft. It serves all the aircraft that pass through Nashville. And some of the folks at the FBO were super cool with me, and some of them you could tell, like, what is this rando, doing, hanging out, talking to people? And I am so thankful that he is the manager, and it was very nice, chatted with him. And, no, I didn't have unfettered access, right? It's a place of business. There's things going on for a reason. But also, he could have just told me to get lost, but he chose not to. And we were still, haven't spoken as much as I wish I could, but I still think very highly of him because, again, it's way easier for them to say no. It's way easier for Then there's reasons why. Let's be honest. There's photographers, and I hate that term spotters, right? But there's spotters out there that have burned bridges for folks and have done the wrong thing. And especially as a military aviator, I understand why. It is way easier to say, nope, get out of here, than to open your arms and embrace folks and instead try to, share the special access and the special stuff that's, kind of going on and passing through the airport. So again, I'm kind of speaking broadly there. There's some stories that you and I both know of, and there's reasons why these things are, why the rules exist, some good reasons and some bad reasons. But again, back to that trust. That's so cool that they trusted you, and that relationship continues to this day. So one thing we haven't hit on yet, but I know it's on the list, there has been more than one T-38 from NASA. So right, the Air Force operates the T-38, Navy has a couple at test pilot school. I think there's even a couple civilian T-38s, but especially NASA, probably the biggest presence we would see down in Mississippi, Florida area is the astronauts flying to the Cape, down to where Starship, all the flight testing is going down in Texas. So we'd see the T-38s flying around all the time, but I know you see them pass through Fort Smith as well. So I know you've gotten to meet and stay in touch with a couple of the astronauts. Hoping maybe you could tell us about that.
Oh, absolutely. Again, great question. Thank you. At first, of course, didn't realize when we'd see the white jet out there, it took just a couple of them to start realizing who they are. White jets with NASA on the tail, those are astronauts. And so over the years, I've gotten to meet probably around, I would say, 50 astronauts. One story that's relative with the NASA astronauts, and Nick and I have both met this particular gentleman. As a matter of fact, this particular gentleman I'm going to tell you about real quickly was the very first fighter pilot that we met in 2005 when we started going out. He was a Navy fighter pilot. There was actually two of them at the time. They had come down in Charlie's. And Victor Glover was one of them, and Rob Curley was the other. And we met them, and we were new at it still. But we walked in. It was on a Saturday morning. The two jets were standing out on the flight line. It was early in the morning. It was about 9 o'clock, I'd say. Of course, they're sitting in the lobby. They're already in their gear and got their do-rags ready to go because, he's going to be a warm one. And we went in and we saw them, and we walked over and introduced ourselves and thanked them. And this was, of course, before anything was being given away or I was doing, any of the flags or anything. It was right at the first of us going out there. So we're talking to Victor and Rob, and for about, not quite 10 minutes. And then Victor says, "Hey, Dave, Race, I'm so sorry." He said, "We've got to go." He said, we're on a mission time frame here. And he said, "Can I ask a favor?" And so I thought to myself, he's asking me for a favor? I thought, yeah. And I said, "Well, yes, sir." I said, whatever we can do. And he said, "Is there any way that y'all could hang out for about an hour?" Because he said, we'll be gone about an hour and then we're going to be back. And he said, "We'd love to visit with you." And I'm like, at first I kind of just didn't know what to say because I thought, wow. And then I said, "Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll be here. We'll be here." And so he said, "Well, thanks." And so, they went out and we watched them from the inside take off and everything. And about an hour, a little more, they're here. They come back. So, of course, they come in and they sit down and start visiting with us. And it was just an incredible experience. It was one of our very, very first experiences to actually get to talk with fighter pilots. And I'll tell something on Rob real fast. Rob, he ended up, and we stayed in touch, he ended up becoming a Blandrel pilot in years to come. And Victor, he is now an astronaut and is going to be, I think, unless they've canceled it, this November, they were supposed to send a rocket up to the moon. And he's either going to be one of the first astronauts to orbit the moon again, or actually when they put a man on the moon again, he might get to do that. One of those two he's going to do. And it's like watching this over the years and watching the accomplishments of these men and women is just mind-numbing to think of the places they've gone. And I've met so many cool astronauts. They've sent me pictures, autographed pictures and things that I've got up in the house. Just treasures that people could offer me millions of dollars. And if anybody's listening to the podcast, sometimes it's a billionaire and says, "Hey, I'm going to go test him out." It won't work. The stuff is priceless to me. All my military stuff that I have that the pilots and crews have given me over the years. And so, yeah, Victor, I've known him since the very first, when I first started, almost like Brian Ferguson, known him just about the same amount of time. But meeting them and talking to them, those astronauts and their stories and doing the things they've done in space and their stories of when they started to where they got to is so encouraging and so uplifting as it is with all of the military that talk to us about the things that they've been able to accomplish and do is just awesome.
That's really cool. I actually had the chance to meet Victor Glover when he passed through Pensacola in a T-38. And it was one of these weird things, walk into a transient alert, and it was him and Jessica Meir, and she had trained as a ASCAN, so an astronaut candidate at VT-10. It was really cool having a conversation with the two of them, and she actually remembered her time there, and when she saw the VT-10 patch on my chest. And they're normal people like the rest of us, but in many ways they are not, because it takes a special individual to do that. I often kind of chuckle when, oh gosh, I think it's Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin, and, you can spend, I don't know, some large amount of money to fly up in the little capsule and, see the Earth through the windows, and they call them astronauts. And I don't want to take anything away from that. They've flown very high in a capsule. That's cool. But I think so very high of our NASA astronauts because they didn't write a check to get there. They truly earned it. And like I said, we select really special folks. And actually, I guess I should mention it. A couple of the folks that have been on the podcast are hopefully going to maybe follow that path soon. So TBD, we'll update everyone when we find out more. But fingers crossed, because again, truly are the best of our nation. And it's so very cool that you got a chance to meet them up close and have those relationships from the very beginning.
Really cool thing about it is that when you meet these people, like you said, they really are. As a matter of fact, they'll not get on to me, but when I'm, really trying to heap these accolades on, whether it's the astronauts or whether it's a fighter pilot or a transport pilot or maintenance crews, they'll talk about that and say, oh, well, I'm putting my flight suit on, one leg at a time, and they try to play it down. And this is an opportunity, I think, for me to say this. What I want all of you and all in our military to understand, again, from the civilian side of things, so many times you've got a job in the military that you do, just like those of us that are civilians. We have jobs and responsibilities, and we do those day in and day out. And, it's easy to forget, this is what I do. I'm just doing it. But for the military, and this is going to those of my military that are doing clerical jobs, that are cooks or doctors, or that aren't involved personally with the aircraft. It doesn't matter. If you're in the military, you are a vital cog to what's going on. I remember talking to an airman that was in finance, and he took care of the checks and stuff to make sure that the airmen were paid. And I was talking to him one day, and he said, I'm just in the office, and it's not that important, and I'm not out there loading the planes or fueling the planes or flying the planes. And I just kind of let him talk, and then I said, I want you to think about something. How do you think the pilots and the maintenance crews and everybody else on the base would feel if they weren't getting their check every month? You've got to understand, everybody in the military, the job they're doing is vital. It's a part of what makes it all work. And that's why when I'm talking to the pilots and air crews, and I ask them, I said, please stop every now and then and think about what you do, the job that you do, and how you do it, and the dedication it takes to do the job. Because I said, if you're not doing the job, then all of us as civilians, we're not going to have a job, because we're not going to have a nation. We'll go away without all of you that stand in front of us to make sure that we're safe and okay. And I always like to tell this to the ones I meet out at the airport, that when the call comes, not if, when the call comes, you're ready. You're right out there in front of us. It's amazing to think that without everything since our nation was formed until this very day, without each of you, and I don't care what the reason was. I've had so many of you tell me, oh, but Dave, they helped me get through college. It was this and that. I don't care. That's great. You deserve everything that you get because you put your freedoms behind for a while to make sure that we're taken care of. And it's just an awesome thing to think about what each of y'all do. And so it's so important that everybody, and I hope everybody, that all of our military members that listen to your podcast understand how important you are and how much you matter. And if I can, there is a story that I would like to tell, and I won't tell the name. I know him. He's a very dear friend of mine. But he came in many years ago in his fighter. I got a chance to visit with him and talk with him, and he had a little time. And just a wonderful guy, just really nice. Was a younger fella. He left, and it was sometime later I got a message from him. He told me, which I'm, again, very humbled and very thankful, but he told me, he said, well, Dave, he said, I just want to tell you something. When I flew in to Fort Smith, I had more on my mind and heart than you realize. I was seriously considering getting out. I was right at the point of saying, I'm done with this. I'm done with it. There was just a lot of issues there, I guess, that were really weighing heavy on him. And he said, after we talked, I had a chance to, when I got back to my base and kind of sit down and relaxed and think about what we had talked about and everything, he said, I realized that, I do play an important part, and I can play an important part in my nation's freedom and my career. He told me, he said, I ended up making the decision to stay in because we just had a really good talk. And of course, I said, but it wasn't me. I said, you knew all along. I said, maybe it just, in our talk, it just kind of helped you think about some things. But this was probably 15 years ago, and he is still flying today. And so that's what I want everyone that listens to your podcast, especially those military members, please understand, not trying to heap more pressure on your shoulders, but I do want you to know how much we as civilians love and appreciate you and your families and what you do. Because if you don't do what you do, our nation will fade away. It's just a fact. And so please don't ever look at yourself as just, I'm doing a job. What you do is the most important job. And it makes sure that everyone in this nation has jobs that we can go to and support our families. And plus, on top of that, there's so many around the world that look up to you and your strength and the strength that you project and know the training that you've got and how dedicated each of you are and what you're doing. And they see that. I've talked to them, especially foreign pilots that I've met flying the T-38s that come out of Shepherd and some out of Vance or Columbus. They see that and they talk about that to me about each of you. So the impact that all in our military have on not just the nation but the world is just incredible. It's bigger than you might think. So thank you for letting me carry on with that for a second.
Of course. No, that's a great story. I'm glad you told it. You went right into my next question. You mentioned the foreign partners and some of the folks from different air forces that you've had the chance to interact with. I know something that has been in the news, and I haven't really kept up with it as much as I probably should have, but something very exciting coming for Fort Smith. So there were F-16s at one point. There were A-10s at one point. The Air Guard has kind of transitioned between different manned fighters. As I understand it, I think there's an unmanned ISR mission right now. But one of the really exciting things is for the first time in many years, there's going to be manned aircraft coming back to Fort Smith to be based there, but it's actually not U.S. Air Force. It's going to be a little bit of a joint international training unit. I believe Singapore is involved, maybe some other countries. So if anyone that knows, I think it's you. I was hoping maybe you kind of get us back up to speed.
Since I was a little kid here in Fort Smith, I used to watch F-100s, the F-101s, and then the F-4s that we had. Of course, got the 16s, as you said, then the A-10s, and now we've got the Reaper. But our base is actually transitioning. Finally got everything done. Been working on the runway for about 3 years to get things ready, but we are going to be the foreign military sales base. So you had mentioned Singapore. Our first F-35 group that's going to get here is Poland. They're supposed to get, I believe, their first 2 aircraft in December, and so they'll be the first ones to come. Then Singapore, at this point, we've kind of been told they're going to bring not just their B-model F-35s, but they're actually bringing their F-16s also. And they're supposed to be here sometime next year. And I know Finland is signed on. Germany is going to be here. Switzerland, I believe, is the other one. And I want to say, I might be wrong in this, I think maybe Czechoslovakia eventually. We're really excited because we're finally getting military traffic again, because with the runway being in the place it was, they would open it for the airlines to come in, but then they would close it again. But we've extended the runway to 9,300 feet. We've put cables in on both ends. That's all done. Everything is done now, so we're good to go. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we're going to have 8 F-35s coming in from Eglin, which is our sister unit that's supporting us in this mission. And they're going to start coming up every couple of weeks and doing, I guess, mini deployments, I guess you could call it, on the ACE program, Agile Combat Employment. They're having the pilots do some things when they're forward deployed that if they don't have crews, maintenance crews there, they can do some things. But they're coming in tomorrow, and then we'll start coming in on a more regular basis. And then it's going to still take a little while to get the wheels really turning, because the F-35s, they haven't been produced for all the countries that are coming yet. They've put orders in, but however that timeline runs for them to get their planes. But yeah, we're really excited about that. Of course, I've got the American flag, but I've gotten a flag for each one of the nations that is coming in, because when they come in, I'd like to welcome them in, with their flag, to let them know, hey, we're glad you're here and we're going to do everything to support you. It's been really exciting here lately because, like I said, with the runway open again, we had 2 F-35s come in from Alabama, the Tuskegee Airmen. And actually one of the pilots, Jab, he's going to actually move up here and be one of the instructor pilots for the foreign pilots that are coming in. His family has already moved here, and I got to meet them. They were it's a really cool family. And so he's going to move up here and actually train. But they came up, and we're going to do a flyover down Garrison Avenue, which is kind of our downtown area. But what they ended up doing also along with that, I guess, because I wasn't there when they did it, but they actually did a flyover of the high school game that was going on that night, North Side and South Side, which is the 2 high schools in town. It's a big rivalry, and the whole city was just going crazy over that. But I actually got to be, I was up in the room, I was actually in the military room at the FBO with them while they were planning and doing the radio talk back and forth and getting everything planned and set up. And so that was really cool. But it's great to have fighters. And the city is just, they're beside themselves. There's a west end, and Nick has probably told you about this before. On the west end of the runway, there's a viewing spot that you can pull your cars in, and it's a pretty good size lot. But I mean, it's just filled to capacity now because everybody loves to see the jets, and they love to wave at the pilots when they go by. And of course, like you talked about with the spotters, there's people, of course, with cameras and taking pictures and such. But it's just, our town is very military oriented. We have been ever since it was, became in existence. We've always had a strong military presence, and the city loves the military. And so it's exciting to have that excitement back from the population, knowing that now we're going to have our military back, and have the presence back. So everybody is really excited about that.
I'm really glad you told that story. And again, this is kind of the cool back and forth of, I get to tell some of my stories as well. But you mentioned the flyover and kind of seeing it from that inside perspective. When I was a college student, I was at Tennessee Tech in Middle Tennessee. And this is back when we first started chatting. I actually chatted a lot back in the day, a lot more than recently, unfortunately, just because my schedule is a little bit nuts these days. But anyway, the reason I mention all that is the Tennessee Titans would have flyovers for the football games, and F-16s, Guard F-16s, active duty F-15Es. I remember some T-45s in there. Back when VFC 12 had the old Legacy Hornets and Oceana, I remember two of those, and the paint scheme they had. I used to really, really love it. But the reason I mention it was that I would do photos as a volunteer for the Tennessee Titans. So a couple of the folks that were at the Titans, I got in touch with them. They would actually send out a Titans flag, so we'd get a photo of the aircrew with that flag in front of the jet. They'd use that for promotional stuff later, and then they'd present the flag to the team after the flyover. Right at halftime, they'd be part of the halftime show, and it was a little bit of a thing. It was kind of neat. But the reason I mention it was I had the opportunity to go take photos, and a lot of these guys would be, hey, do you want to sit in on the brief? And I've always been a timely person in life. Try to be on time. My mom taught me that from a young age, and I remember, it's always good to be on time, but then hearing these folks describe, well, not only on time, last note of the national anthem, and not a second early, not 2 seconds late, and the techniques of how to do it. And the funny thing was, I joined the military, and these years later when we're flying the T-6 around trying to do flyovers and be on time, some of the techniques they taught me, I was a civilian before even joining the military, some of those things still stuck with me, and it was a starting point to how do you actually do it the right way in this airplane. And there's no afterburner in the T-6, so we couldn't be quite as loud and couldn't be maybe quite as low as we'd like to be at sometimes. But I guess I say all that because, again, those were memories, those were touch points that I had well before the military. But someone was nice and opened the door and allowed me to be part of it. And you don't really realize, you see that 2 seconds on, Sports Center or whatever, that little bit as the flyover happens, you don't realize all that's going on behind it to generate the airplanes, to plan it, to get the airspace coordination done, to be on time at the end of the anthem. So, man, that's really cool. I'm glad you got to see it, and I know I enjoyed seeing it as well.
You're right on with that on the planning part. It's incredible. People watch the NASCAR races and see my wife always tapes that for me so that I can see the flyover. I want to see the flyover. And sometimes it's not the military, but most of the time there's a military aircraft that flies over. But the planning that goes on with that is just crazy. You're exactly right. And to hear the process and to watch it kind of come together is just the coolest thing. Because like you said, it takes a lot of hard work and patience and planning and looking at all the different situations that are going on to make sure you got everything covered and nothing's not where it's supposed to be, or you're where you're supposed to be. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to watch that all come together. And of course, what's cool is to see the people's faces at the stadiums or at the car races or whatever it is, wherever the flyover's at, to watch them with pride as they look up and wave their hats or wave and smile. And that's what all of you in the military bring us, is so much pride and just thankfulness for that moment. And of course, mine, I live it. That's who I am, and I'm not ashamed of that. But that's what I try to tell so many civilians is like, look, when you see that flag, or you see that flyover, you see the military trucks coming through the town as they're going on their summer deployments or whatever. I said, just think about what those men and women are doing and what they mean to us, because without them, it's not even just the wartime. It's in peacetime too, because what happens with natural disasters? Who's the first ones to show up? It's the military. They're there to do whatever needs to be done, to help, to pick us up. That's what I try to preach to all my civilian friends and people that will listen, that we have such, and I'll just say this to you and to those military members I meet and that hopefully will hear this podcast, is that each of you are national treasures to us. And I don't say that lightly. And I'll have a lot of my military members, when I say that, they'll just kind of look at me and smile. And I said, that's okay. I'm looking at it from a whole different angle. I said, I'm a civilian. I'm the recipient of everything that you and your families have done. So to watch these processes and the hard work that goes in, like you said, to do that is just really fascinating to see, because there is a lot of hard work that goes into that.
One thing I wanted to kind of get back to is, yes, we're honoring the flag, we're honoring the anthem. Being on time for a flyover is important. But why? Like, what's the why behind it? I think understanding that is always so helpful. Being on time is important in the military. I was not a fighter pilot, but these fighter pilots that are out there, being on time, on target literally means if that bomb needs to hit the target at this moment, we're going to do it at this moment. Not 5 seconds early, not 10 seconds late, exactly when it's briefed and exactly when it's called for. Where I kind of exist in the military right now, not in a flying role, I'm on a ship. Timeliness still just as important. And so, one of our morning meetings, a couple of our folks showed up a minute late, and everyone's sitting there in the shop waiting. We're all literally waiting on this one person to show so we can start the day. They show up a little late, and it's no big deal and this and that. Well, hey, let's translate that into, we have a man overboard, and we hear it called away. We have to run up to our shop and muster. And for a little bit, we were helping out one of our other divisions on the ship. So when they do what's called a shipboard recovery, basically they have the SAR swimmer, everybody runs down to a location in the ship. There's side port doors on either side of the ship. And basically they're going to do a turn with the ship. It's a whole big thing, right? They call man overboard away. They throw a smoke flare in the water so we know where the ship physically was when someone we think went in the water. And then they're literally going to turn the ship around to try to recover them. And it has to happen in a certain time. And there's people in the shower. There's people in the bathroom. There's people everywhere all over the ship. But the moment that that's called away and people are responding, they're doing it immediately. And they're getting there as fast as possible. They're on time. They're on target. Because, hey, if you were a couple minutes late and you're floating in the Arabian Gulf waiting on someone to pick you up because you fell overboard, you got blown off the flight deck, whatever the case might be, right? Those minutes, those seconds, it all actually matters. And sometimes translating the little things into the big things, people don't always see it. Yeah, I was a minute late for the morning meeting. Okay. Well, what if you're a minute late for something that's critical and that costs someone's life or injures someone or whatever the case might be? So not trying to be melodramatic, but the point is it all matters, and we practice that. And again, we're in this case, it's showing off at a football game, whatever the case might be. That's awesome, and there's a purpose behind that as well about showing that precision, but that precision ends up being impactful in other ways too.
Yeah, thank you for telling that story, because I was trying to draw a picture in my mind while you were explaining what you were explaining about the minute late and then about the rescue of someone that could have fallen overboard. That's so important, because you're right. You have to take it serious. That's what, for us as civilians in this nation, we have that trust that, hey, all of y'all are taking it serious. And you know your jobs, know how to do them. And you're right. A minute late, yeah, may not sound like much, but it all connects together. And what if you are a little bit late doing this and somebody pays the price for that? I mean, it is that serious. So I appreciate you telling that story, because I had this picture in my mind of you on this ship, and I'm used to seeing you in the air. And so I was trying to adjust my thoughts. So like, okay, Antonio's on the ship now. He's not flying. He's not piloting. He's on the ship. So I had to kind of get that in my mind first, but then thinking about, you're right, the importance of being on time, because it's that important.
It sure is, and it's a very different world than aviation in some ways. I'm assistant air operations officer, so again, in some ways there's a little bit of an aviation component to it. In other ways, there is very little at times. It's a challenge. It's a leadership challenge. I got so many stories. Many of them I will tell you offline. So anyway, as we continue to transition, kind of going through the list of stuff, we haven't really maybe given the Air Force its due. We talked about the Guard unit there, but I know you've had a lot of really great interactions with people, Air Force aviators flying through. I know there's a story with a C-17, so I wanted to maybe get that one first and then tell some Air Force stories as well as some of the aviators that have passed through Fort Smith.
With the Air Force, the different units that I've had a chance to meet, again, all of my units have been so kind to me and so good. There is one particular story, though. There's two that I'll tell quickly. One of them is a dear friend to still stay in touch with. Met him within the first year again when we started doing it. Jeff Hack Hickman. He's just a prince of a guy, just a wonderful person. He was a F-16 demo pilot for Viper East. So he would come through about 3 times a year. When Race and I met him the first time, he was so kind and so nice, and I never understood why he did this. He was getting ready to leave to go on to his next destination. He was climbing up the ladder, and we were a little ways back from him. He had let us go out, and we were standing a little ways back from him because we knew where we needed to be. Then he comes back down the ladder, and he said, "Oh, Dave, I forgot to do this." He said, "Here's my contact information." And I'm like, "Oh, my goodness, wow, thank you." And then off he went. So we got in touch with each other and would talk, and I found out a few months later he was going to fly an air show in Memphis, Tennessee. It's about 4.5 hours from Fort Smith to get there. And so I told him, I said, when I found out he was going to fly that show, I said, "Hey, we'd like to come out and see you, if that's okay. Well, he was just, yeah, that'd be great. So we go out to the air show, and of course he fixes us up with VIPs, tickets, and we get to go on the other side of the gate and everything. And he had us in a little van on the runway, or out on the taxiway, I'm sorry. He said, hey guys, he said, do me a favor. He rolled the windows down. He said, we're going to drive by the show line. I want you just to wave. Just wave. And we said, okay. And so he said, because when you do, he said, they think you're one of the pilots. And I said, really? He said, yeah. So he drove down the flight line, and we were waving. And I mean, the crowd was just, everybody was just waving at us. So that was funny. That was a lot of fun. So we pull around to where his jet's parked, which they have two F-16s, because in case one has a problem, they've got an extra. And so we're looking at it, and he's showing us around. And the ladder's there on the plane. And he said, Dave, would you like to sit up in the jet? And I said, oh, yeah. I said, that would be so neat. And so he said, okay, come on up. So he climbs up, and he gets on the back, kind of on the back side. And so I get up, and he shows me how to get in, step on the seat and then down, and don't, be careful, don't touch this, don't pull that. And so we sit down, and he's talking to me, and he says, okay, he said, you can see, he said, we don't have a stick in the middle. He said, it's over here on the side. I said, yeah, I noticed that. And he said, well, do me a favor. He said, would you grab a hold of the stick on the side that controls the plane? He said, just kind of get a feel for it. And he said, just kind of move it around. And I said, oh, okay. And so he was sitting kind of up behind me. Well, I began to try to move the stick, and it wasn't budging. And so I started trying to be a little more aggressive, putting a little more pressure. Couldn't move it. And so after about a minute of me trying to do this, I turned around to him and I said, Hank, I think there's something wrong with your jet. I said, this stick won't move. And he was almost in tears. He was laughing so hard. He said, Dave, I'm sorry. He said, the stick doesn't move. He said, I was just funning with you. I said, the stick doesn't move. And he said, no, it doesn't move. I said, well, how do you fly the plane then? And he said, well, it senses your pressure that you put on it. And I just looked and I said, you got to be kidding me. So we had a good laugh out of it and a lot of fun. But that was so cool. And to this day, I mean, he's retired now, but just a wonderful guy. He meant so much to me. He's been so special to me, like the other ones I've told you about over the years. And one other story I'll tell you about Air Force was we used to have a lot of T1s that would come in. T1 is like a trainer for those that graduate that are going to fly heavies, like C-130s or C-17s or C-5s. That kind of trains them. And we had one come in one night. This was when Race was little. And so he came in, and his students went upstairs, and we're doing some paperwork and stuff. And he was just kind of down, leaving them alone and letting them do their thing. And so we struck up a conversation and started talking, and just really was having a really good conversation for like an hour. But all three of us were talking, and so the students came back down, and he looked at both of us, and he said, well, Dave, Race, he said, I'm really sorry. He said, it's time for us to go. And I said, well, no. I said, thank you so much for visiting with us and telling us your story, and it's really special to hear everything. And so he stops, and he looks at us. He reaches up and tears off a patch off of his shoulder, and he hands it to us. He said, I want y'all to have this. And it's the first patch we ever got. And I said, well, no, sir. I said, we can't take your patch. I said, no. He said, no, you don't understand. He said, I want you to have this. And I said, but it's your patch. And he said, it would mean a lot to me if y'all would take this. And, of course, we both said, well, thank you so much. It was a B-1B patch. He was a B-1B pilot, and now he was an instructor pilot, training other pilots how to fly the heavies. And he said, I want you to have this. He said, it's kind of worn, and it's kind of frazzled. And we both just said, well, wow, thank you. It doesn't matter. This is so special for you to give us a patch, And he said, well, this patch that I'm giving you, he said, I've flown over 100 missions with this patch. That's when I handed it back and said, please, we can't take this from you. And he again was like, I want y'all to have that. So it's framed up in the house. Just to think that he would do something like that, give us something, 100 mission patch from a B-1B bomber. And we were just blown away. Like I said, we still got it. It's in the family, and we'll stay in the family for generations. So that's just a few of the stories, but those were special ones there.
Well, you mentioned in the family. I think that's so important. You mentioned your son, Race. Do you think he would have joined the Air Force and had that career and that connection had it not been for those early memories and you all spending time out at the airport?
That's a really great question that I will try to give the best answer I can. I really do think that it did have some bearing on him joining the Air Force. He's a really smart young man. He's very driven, knows what he wants. And I think he decided, because we were asking him as he was a senior in high school, son, you haven't really talk to us about college or anything. What's your plans? Well, I just don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so we said, well, look, we'll pay for your first year of college and get you started if that's what it is. And he said, I don't know. He said, I'll let you know what I'm going to do when I decide. And we said, okay. So it was about 4 months after that. He was just about to graduate. And he said, he walks into the room and he said, Mom, Dad, I said, I need to talk to you. And we said, okay, we sit down. And he said, well, I've decided what I'm going to do. I had an idea what it was. I just did. And I don't know why, but I did. And he said, I'm going to join the Air Force. And I looked and I said, really? I was really excited. And my poor wife, she looks over and she says, what? And so, he said, yeah. He said, I'm going to join the Air Force. And he said, I know what I want to do. He picked his career. He became, which he loves mechanicking. He can tear a car down and build a car back. He's really good with that mechanical stuff. And so he became a mechanic on the B-52 and worked in the fuel systems on the B-52 and was really doing great, and was really, when he had joined, had planned on staying for 20 years. But he started looking at career paths outside the Air Force and found a really good career path that he started going to school for. After he got out of the Air Force, he was 6 years in the Air Force, and he got out and went to college for his new career, which he's doing now as NDI, which is non-destructive inspection, and he's just done really good with it and is really happy, and we're really proud of him and for him. But I do believe that meeting those pilots and crews back years ago, I think it stuck with him. I do. I'm not sure if that was the deciding factor, but I think it had a lot to do with it.
That's awesome. And again, I had a feeling it probably played a little bit of a role, but every time you as a member of the military have that opportunity to reach out to folks and speak with them, you never know what it's going to lead to. And I've had a lot of people tell me as a young person, I couldn't imagine myself in the role. But then when I had a chance to talk to someone, someone who was a pilot or someone that was a maintainer, it made sense. You kind of realize, like I've been trying to say this whole time, we're just people, just like anybody else. We have the same problems, the same joys and frustrations at times. But when you get to have that personal connection, it makes it all make sense. I know you had mentioned just how supportive your wife and your family has been to this whole process. I know you wanted a chance to kind of brag on all of them, so I wanted to give you that too.
Well, I appreciate that. Of course, my son's the one that got this started. My wife has been so acceptive of all this because it takes a lot of time, which I love to give. That's not even the issue. But at the first, when this started, she would have dinner fixed. The FBO would call us, hey, we've got aircraft coming in, military aircraft, and we would zip out there. And, we would be out there for 3 or 4 hours at a time. Well, she's gone to all this work to fix dinner. It's just sitting there. So it got to the point to where she would just say, okay, dinner's in the fridge when you get home. It's ready. But she's been very good and very kind about, my time. She knows what this means to me. And she's allowed me to, without any guilt or anything, to sometimes, we had plans and I would tell her and we would cancel our plans so that I could go out to the airport. She's been very understanding about that. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about both of them real quickly and to thank them for helping me really enjoy this even more, because I don't have the guilt of thinking, well, I shouldn't have done this or shouldn't have done that. I should be here. That's never been an issue. They've always been very supportive, and even to the point that I've been so fortunate over the years to get, oh my goodness, how do I even say this? Many of my pilots have sent me parts of aircraft that we're doing maintenance on. The part was either going to be thrown away or they didn't need it. I've gotten aircraft parts from A-10s, from F-16s, from the OH-58, the Kiowa. I've got a rotor blade. Now, it's been cut. It's not completely elongated like it would be normal, but from a CH-47, from a crew that I was sending packages to on deployment in Afghanistan. They actually took one of the main blades and they cut it off, made about a 3-foot section, and wrote a message on it. And so all of these things, blessings, and she lets me to display them in the house. I've got pictures and the flags I told you about, the 21 plus flags that I've had framed and put up in our. She told me the only thing that I can't do, and I totally understand, she said, you can have everything but the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen. Every other room, the other 2 bedrooms and the front room and our game room, is just military. My military stuff up, because I love walking around and thinking to myself and saying how blessed we are to have these men and women that represent this flag. It was special enough, to them to send me something like this that I can display and look at and remember what they've done and what they're doing for all of us. So she's been really, really awesome about letting almost our whole house be a military museum. So thank you for that opportunity to thank both my wife and my son, because again, nobody does it alone. You've got to have that support to help you achieve the things that you achieve. Now, absolutely, you've got to have that drive to do it on your own, but you're never alone. There's always somebody else there, like you've talked about with some of your dear friends from the past, that means so much to you and have helped you realize your dreams and become a better man. And it just doesn't get any better than that. It's just the most awesome thing.
Okay, Dave, going down the list here, looking at our notes, you mentioned a Corvette story. I don't think I've heard that one, or if I have, I don't remember it. I was hoping maybe you could tell it again.
Yes, it's interesting, some of the things that happen that you're not planning on. We've got a 2011 Grand Sport Corvette that took us quite a while until we got older to be able to get it. Really fun car. But I was out in it one day, got a call from the airport while I was out. Hey, an F-18's landing. I said, okay, I'll be right there. So, I drive in and park the car, and I walk inside, and, I catch him before he gets in and was able to flag him in and everything and go back into the FBO and let him do his thing at the jet. And then he comes in, and we start talking, and he's actually going to be there for a couple of hours. He's not on a quick turn. And so as we're talking just about everything, and it just comes to my mind. I said, wait a minute, I've got the Corvette. I said, I wonder if he'd mind if I could pull it out there and have a picture made with his jet. And I thought, well, probably not. But then I thought, well, I'll just ask. And so I asked him, and I said, hey, I've got my Corvette with me. I said, is there a chance that I could pull it out and do it real fast? But I would love to park it, not too close, but by your jet and get some pictures with my car and your jet. And I said, I don't want to get you in trouble or anybody in trouble. I said, you might want to call, if you don't mind, you might want to call your CO just to make sure it's okay. He said, oh, yeah. I said, I don't think it'd be a problem. He said, let me call him. And so he calls him, and he gets off the phone. He says, no, he said, it'll be fine. And I said, well, we'll do it fast, and then I'll get out of your way. And I said, I appreciate you letting me do this. And he said, oh, yeah, no problem. So we go out. I go through the gate with the car, and we get some shots, and I get some shots of him with the car by the plane and all that, and we're just having a ball. And I said, would you like to drive the car? And he said, are you kidding? You'd let me drive this? And I said, well, sure, absolutely, I trust you. And I said, if you want to, I said, when you get in it, go down here to the gate. And I said, that gate will open up automatically for you. And I said, you can just go out and drive it around for as long as you want and, have some fun. Well, he gets in the car and he starts it up, and, he pulls out pointing straight east down the flight line. And the flight line happens to be completely empty. There's nothing on the flight line whatsoever. So he takes it for a little drag race and just takes off like a rocket and just disappears down the flight line. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I finally did it. This is going to get me banned, because I was waiting for somebody in the FBO to come out and holler and said, the tower just called and said, who's that going down the flight line at 100 miles an hour in a Corvette? But anyways, he goes in, he turns around, here he comes back at, 100 plus miles an hour. So he pulls up and stops, and he says, oh, man, he said, that was great. He said, this thing goes. He said, I still have plenty of pedal left. And I said, it does, it goes. But I said, did you enjoy? He said, I had a blast. He said, thanks for letting me drive it. I said, absolutely. I said, I'm glad you had a good time. And so anyways, I drive the car back out and park it in the parking lot, and we sit down in the FBO and we're talking until it was time for him to leave. I flag him back out. The call never came from the tower or anybody else that was upset about it, so I skirted one on that one, but the smile on his face was priceless. He had a ball driving that car and then going 100 plus miles an hour down the flight line with it. So again, won't tell the person, won't tell the unit, but it was a lot of fun, and it's fun to see him have some joy out of that, because I know he wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't either. But it was a cool moment that I look back now on and laugh, but at the time I was kind of cringing just a little bit, but it worked out okay.
Dave, thank you again for being so gracious and spending so much time. Thank you again for what you do every day in Fort Smith. It's truly been a pleasure being your friend for these many years, and I know other folks have shared your story. I know that there's some info out there about you and what you do, but I think honestly the folks that know you the best are, like I said, military air crews that have passed through Fort Smith. I never had the chance to do it in the 53. I never had the chance to get up there in a T-6, unfortunately, but I enjoyed our time together we've had now. So I want to say thank you. That's how we end all these, with gratitude, but also you get the final word. So anything maybe I should have asked you, anything you want to say, it is over to you to close us out.
Well, Antonio, I want to first thank you for allowing me to be on your podcast, to hopefully let as many know as possible how special all of you in the military are to us as civilians, and the gratitude and thankfulness that we have for each one of you and your families, and to always remember that we as civilians will always be in debt to each of you for what you've given us. And like I say, the incredible sacrifices that all of you have made. There's no way to put words to it, but from every part of us as civilians, thank you all so much for being who you are and doing what you do and being, I guess this is something I've said to the pilots and air crews that I've met, is that I want each of you to realize that, again, as I talked about, my military is singular, it's not plural, because of what you did and what all in our military, past, present, and future, are doing and have done. When our nation was formed by those brave men and women that stepped up, and many of them not only lost their lives, but they lost their livelihoods. They lost everything to give freedom the roots to grow, to get stronger, to be established, to that foundation, to what we've got now. But I want each of you to remember, because of each of you, the chain of freedom has never been broken, but each of you are a link in that chain. And you've made sure that that chain has stayed strong all these centuries. And now each of you can see the importance of what you've done or what you're doing now. We're so grateful and thankful to all of you that have served our nation in the way you have, and with the incredible sacrifices that so many of you have made. It's not gone unnoticed, I promise you. And as much as I'm able to, I let everybody know, and I don't do it in an arrogant or a way that's not appropriate, but y'all give us everything. Y'all have given us everything by the lives that you've lived, the lives that you're living now. It's just, I want each of you to know how important you are. And there's no words. There's just no words. I joke all the time with pilots and crews that I meet that, hey, if I could give you a briefcase right now that had $1 million in it, that's not going to pay my debt to each of you, because you've given me everything. That's one thing with so many of the pilots that I've met, especially those Navy pilots that are on the carriers. When they give me their addresses, I'll tell them, I said, look, you're staying in my prayers, and just know that anything you need, let me know, and I'll do my very best to get it. And they'll say, look, we so appreciate that. But Dave, would you please be thinking about our families? We know the job. We know what we've got to do, and that's what we do. We go out and we do our job. We're focused on that, and we do it. But our families that are back home, they've got to take care of all the daily business that goes on and keep the household going and take care of the children and, make sure the bills are paid and do. They've got the tough job. So again, I want to let the families know, the pilots and the maintenance crews that are out there doing their work, whatever branch it is, they can't do the kind of job that they need to do without that support from their families and the support of knowing that, everybody's being taken care of and they're doing fine. That's going to be on their mind. And so many times we understood this with Race when he was on deployment. We couldn't contact him and he couldn't contact us. And so you don't know what's going on. And that's with all the families. So all of you, again, there's just no way, and I'll stop here because I'll get carried on and I'll start repeating myself, and I don't mean to do that. But for all in our military, thank you all so very much for what you do, for giving us not only freedom, but as I said before, giving us hope. And for those that may hear the podcast and that do come to Fort Smith, please don't be afraid of me. I'm in my mid-60s, and I will act like a little kid sometimes when I'm around you. I'm so excited to hear your stories if there's time enough for you to say it. And sometimes there's not, because it'll still be an honor to flag you in and let you know how valued and important you are and the difference that you make in countless lives, mine being one of them. So, Antonio, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity. This is one of those things that I will never forget, and I'm so honored that you would allow me to do so. And thank you for your wonderful friendship that's going to continue through the rest of my life. And I'm very grateful and thankful for that, as I'm very grateful and thankful for you and your wonderful family.
Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests, and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time.
DCL idle, wings level, flare, we're safe on deck.